Yo, what's up everyone? It's OMNI Wizard and today we're checking out what if Harry entered Narnia through the Vanishing Cabinet and returned as a grown king. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1. The cabinet. The detention form said lines, 300 repetitions, and Umbridge had smiled when she handed it to him, the way a cat smiles at something that can't run fast enough. Harry sat in her office now, surrounded by her collection of decorative plates, each one showing a different cat in a different pose, all of them moving in slow, glazed loops, and he wrote. The quill she'd given him wasn't normal. He'd figured that out after the first 20 lines, when the back of his right hand started stinging in a way that wasn't from cramping. He turned it over. The words were there in the skin, red and slightly raised. I must not tell lies. He hadn't said anything. He'd looked at her, looked at the words on his hand, looked back at her. Is there a problem, Mr. Potter? She'd said in that voice that was all pink sugar and wire. No, he'd said, and gone back to writing. That had been 2 hours ago. Now it was past 11. The castle was dark and quiet in the way it only got after midnight, and he'd filled 6 sheets of parchment with the same sentence. His hand had stopped hurting. That was almost worse, like his body had just given up registering it as damage. He set the quill down when she finally told him he was dismissed, and he walked out of her office without looking at the plates or her face or anything except the corridor floor. The corridors of Hogwarts at this hour had a quality to them that he'd never quite gotten used to, even after 5 years. Something about the way the torchlight moved, too slowly, like it was thinking about something. The portraits slept. The staircases shifted in the dark, without the usual crowd to navigate around them, and the whole castle felt like a held breath. His hand had stopped stinging and started aching, the way a bruise aches when you press it. He could feel the words raised against his palm every time he made a fist. He wasn't sure what he was feeling, not quite anger, not quite despair. Something underneath both of those, something that had been building since September and hadn't found anywhere to go. Ron had offered to punch something on his behalf. Hermione had made detailed notes about Umbridge's potential legal vulnerabilities under educational statutes. Neither of those had helped. He took a wrong turn somewhere near the 4th floor. The castle did that sometimes, nudging you somewhere you hadn't intended, and ended up in a corridor he didn't immediately recognize. It wasn't one of the main routes. The stones here were slightly different, older, and there was a draft coming from somewhere that smelled faintly of cedar and cold air. The room of requirement was on the 7th floor. He wasn't even close to the 7th floor. But the door in front of him looked like the kind of door the room of requirement produced when you needed somewhere to be alone, unnaturally solid, no markings, set into the wall like it had been there since the castle's foundations. Harry stood in front of it for a moment. The ache in his hand pulsed once. He pushed it open. The room inside was small and cold and smelled like old wood and stone dust. It wasn't the room of requirement. It was clearly just a room, a disused storage room by the look of it, full of the kind of forgotten furniture that castles accumulate over centuries. Broken chairs, a wardrobe with its mirror cracked diagonally, 3 crates stacked against the far wall, and in the center of the room, sitting on a low stone platform as though it had been placed there with some deliberateness, a cabinet. It was tall, nearly 7 feet, made of dark wood that might have been mahogany once but had gone almost black with age. The carvings on the doors were worn smooth in places, but Harry could still make out what looked like vines or serpents or possibly both, twisting around the frame. There was no visible lock. The doors sat slightly ajar, showing only darkness inside. Harry knew what vanishing cabinets were. He'd heard the term, had a vague sense that they came in pairs, that you could enter one and exit the other, no matter where the other one was located. Fred and George had shoved Montague into one 2nd year, no, 3rd year, and Montague had spent a month in some state between both places, which sounded like an absolutely horrifying way to spend a month. This was almost certainly one of those. He should walk away. He knew that. He was tired and his hand hurt, and he had a charms essay due Thursday that he hadn't started. And whatever this cabinet was connected to, it wasn't his problem. He stood in front of it for another minute. The ache in his hand had moved up his wrist now, climbing toward his elbow. He thought about Umbridge's smile. He thought about sitting in that office for 2 more hours tomorrow night, writing the same sentence until it was in his skin. He thought about Dumbledore, who had spent the last 4 months refusing to look at him directly, like Harry was something to be managed, not spoken to. He thought about the dream he kept having of a corridor and a door and something important on the other side that he couldn't quite reach. He thought, what's the worst that could happen? He'd asked that question before. The answers had included a basilisk, a lake full of grindylows, a graveyard in Little Hangleton, and Voldemort. He pulled the cabinet doors open and stepped inside. It was dark, not the comfortable dark of a closed space, but the absolute dark of something with no dimensions. Harry had exactly 2 seconds to think this was a mistake before the floor dropped out from under him. Not fell, dropped, like gravity had made a decision without him. He hit snow. The impact knocked the air out of him, and he lay still for a moment, face turned sideways, pressed against cold white ground, staring at a world that was entirely unfamiliar. The snow was real. He could feel it melting against his cheek, could hear the silence of it, which was different from regular silence in the way that only vast open spaces create. He blinked. Above him was a sky, a night sky, but wrong in some indefinable way, the stars arranged in patterns he didn't recognize, and the moon, which was bigger than it had any right to be, hanging low and ancient over the horizon. He pushed himself upright. He was in a forest. The trees were enormous, older than anything he'd seen, taller than the forbidden forest's oldest growth, their trunks as wide as houses, their branches bare and black against the snow. Ice had formed on everything, bark, fallen branches, the stones half buried in the white ground. His breath made visible clouds in the air. It was cold, not English cold, not Scotland in November cold, but a deep, bone-working cold that felt like it had been here for a long time and had no intention of leaving. Behind him there was nothing. No door, no cabinet, just snow and trees and silence. Harry stood up. He was still in his school robes, which were not designed for this. His wand was in his pocket. He always kept it on him now, after the tournament, after the graveyard, and he drew it without thinking about it, turning a slow circle. The forest was dark except for the moonlight on the snow, which made everything blue-white and shadowless in a way that was somehow more unsettling than actual darkness. Something moved in the trees to his left. He spun toward it, wand raised. For a moment there was nothing. Then the shape resolved, low to the ground, moving too quickly for its size, and what he'd thought was a shadow wasn't a shadow at all. It was a wolf, a huge wolf, not like any wolf he'd seen in illustrations or through the bars of a zoo enclosure. It was the size of a pony, pale gray against the snow, and it was watching him with eyes that held an intelligence that was immediately and distinctly unsettling. It opened its mouth and it spoke. "Human," it said in a voice like gravel shifting underwater. "You smell of a door." "What door?" Harry stared. His brain was running through several simultaneous tracks, talking wolf magic, not a werewolf, definitely intelligent, potentially dangerous, and he kept his wand up because there was no version of this situation where lowering it first seemed like a good idea. "A cabinet," he said, because some part of him had learned that honest answers bought more time than deflection. "I stepped into a cabinet in my school. I'm not sure where I am." "Your school?" The wolf's ears moved. "You are a child." "I'm 15, a child," the wolf said again, but something in its tone shifted, not dismissive, more like recalibrating. "There is no school in these lands. There is the witch's castle and the witch's roads and the witch's wolves who patrol them. My pack has not yet found you, which means you came through a path they don't know. That is either very lucky or very deliberate." "Which are you?" Harry asked. "Her wolf, or if I were her wolf," the creature said, "you'd already be running." A pause. The forest made no sound, not even whined. "I am Fenwick," the wolf said, and the dignity in the way it said it made Harry understand that this was not a casual introduction. "I was a hunter of the western wood before the cold came. I am nothing that serves the White Lady." It paused again, studying him. "You don't know what that means." "No," Harry admitted. "I don't know this place at all." "Then you are in considerable danger." Fenwick's gaze moved past Harry, scanning the tree line. "There are wolf packs that run her routes through here every 3 hours. You stepped into my territory, not theirs, but the routes cross half a mile east. We need to move." Harry glanced at the space behind him one more time, the blank snow, the absent door. "Move where?" "Somewhere warm," Fenwick said, "where there are others who are not hers. Whether you stay there or not is your own affair, but you cannot stand in the middle of the birch run at midnight and live to make that decision." Harry lowered his wand, not pocketed it, just lowered it and nodded. "All right." Fenwick moved and Harry followed. They walked for nearly an hour. Harry didn't try to make conversation. He spent the time watching the shape of the forest, the way the cold didn't change regardless of how deep into the trees they went, the fact that there were no animal sounds at all, no owls, no distant foxes, nothing. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the silence of something that had been driven out or frozen out or simply exhausted into stillness. Once, Fenwick stopped abruptly and Harry stopped with him. The wolf stood rigid for a full minute, nose working, and then very quietly pressed flat against a drift of snow and waited. Harry did the same without being told. He heard it then, something moving through the trees parallel to them, unhurried. Heavy paws on packed snow, more than one wolf. They passed without stopping, and Fenwick waited another 2 minutes before moving again. The shelter, when they reached it, was not what Harry had been picturing. He'd half imagined a cave or a hut. What it actually was, a section of cliff face that jutted out over a stone shelf, with the gap between cliff and shelf blocked on three sides by deliberately piled stones and logs. Not a building. More like the idea of a building, the intention of warmth and cover, built by creatures who understood necessity without comfort. There were three of them inside. The centaur saw Harry first. He was seated against the stone wall with his legs folded awkwardly beneath his horse body, which didn't look like a natural position, and probably wasn't, and he had the kind of face that had been authoritative once and was now exhausted past the point of hiding it. Gray-bearded, broad-shouldered, and very still in the way that people get still when they've had a lot of practice at not making sudden movements. He was looking at Harry the way a general looks at unexpected variables. "Fenwick," he said without taking his eyes off Harry. "You found something." "It found itself," Fenwick said, moving past Harry to curl up near the far wall. "A human child through a door that shouldn't exist, claims he arrived by accident." "I did arrive by accident," Harry said, because he wasn't going to stand here and be talked around while he was standing right there. "My name's Harry Potter. I'm a student. I'm a wizard actually, I'm not from here. I don't know where here is." The centaur regarded him. His eyes were dark and measuring. "Not from here," he repeated. "Yet you carry a wand and you stood in the birch run at midnight without panicking, apparently." "I've had a complicated few years." "Brashen," said the centaur, placing his own name like a card on a table. "Former first general of the centaur companies under the Free Ridge Council, which no longer exists. Currently, alive, which I count as an achievement." The other two figures in the shelter were watching now. One was a faun, unmistakably, impossibly a faun, exactly as Harry had once read about in some illustrated mythology book when he was 11 and living with the Dursleys, and reading anything he could get his hands on. She was young, or looked it, with curling dark hair and the small curved horns of her kind at her temples, wrapped in a coat made from what appeared to be three different animal hides stitched together by someone who'd prioritized warmth over aesthetics. She was looking at Harry with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and professional suspicion. "Myra," she said, before he could ask. "I'm going to assume you don't know what a faun is, since you've got that face people get when they're trying not to stare at someone's legs." "I know what a faun is," Harry said. "I just didn't think they were real." She raised an eyebrow. "That's a very rude thing to say to someone whose fire you're currently grateful for." There was a small fire, he realized, barely more than coals in a stone bowl, generating more heat than light, the smoke channeled out through a gap in the stone ceiling. He moved toward it without ceremony because he was genuinely cold, and there was no point pretending otherwise. The third figure hadn't moved or spoken yet. When Harry finally looked at him properly, he understood why. The talking bear was enormous, bigger than any bear Harry had seen in photographs or zoos, and currently pressed into the back corner of the shelter in what was clearly a deliberate attempt not to be intimidating and not entirely succeeding. He had deep brown fur and small, very calm eyes. "Oren," the bear said when Harry looked at him. His voice was low and rumbly and oddly gentle. "I know you weren't expecting me. Most people aren't." "The wolf and the centaur and the faun and the bear," Harry said, mostly to himself. "We're nobody's allegory," Myra said. "We're survivors, which is less romantic." Brashen was still watching Harry with that measuring look. "You said you're a wizard." "Yes. What does that mean where you come from?" "I use a wand. I know spells, charms, transfiguration, defense. I can produce a patronus which repels dementors." "What are dementors?" "Dark creatures, soul-consuming." Aslan, he stopped. He wasn't sure why that name came out. He'd read it somewhere. The mythology book, maybe. Something changed in the shelter. Not dramatically, just a slight shift in posture, a particular stillness, the way the air in a room changes when someone says the name of something that matters. "You know that name," Brashen said quietly. "I've heard of him." "Read of him actually a long time ago." "Is he real?" Myra said, and her voice was completely different now. "Yes, he's real. He doesn't come, not now, not with the cold this deep, but he's real. The witch's power grows when he withdraws," Brashen said. "That is either a sign or a coincidence. I've stopped being sure I know the difference." Harry held his hands over the coal fire. The ache in his hand from Umbridge's quill had faded somewhere during the walk. The cold was more immediate, and he was trying to build a picture of this place from the fragments they were giving him. A white witch whose wolves patrolled the night. A cold that had been here too long. Creatures in hiding. A name said like a prayer. "Who is she?" he asked. "The witch. Jadis," Brashen said. "She calls herself Queen. She came from elsewhere, not from Narnia, not originally, and she brought winter with her like a second skin. She has been here." He paused. A long time. I was 20 when the cold began to deepen. I am 73 now. 50 years of winter. Harry sat with that for a moment. She has the stone table, Myra said. And she has the deep magic, or she believes she does, which amounts to the same thing in practice. Her stone army, her wolves. She's turned half the creatures of Narnia to statues in her courtyard. Anyone who crosses her, anyone who refuses her claim. But not you, Harry said. Any of you. Not yet, Fenwick said from the corner without opening his eyes. Because we are careful, Brashen said, and because we are few, and because we have been losing for 50 years, and because, he stopped himself. A careful pause. What we have been doing is surviving. Whether that will ever become something more is the question that keeps me awake. Harry looked at him. He could see what Brashen wasn't saying, could see the shape of it in the way he held himself, the general's posture with no army behind it, the strategist's mind with no strategy left that didn't end in the same failure as the last one. He knew what that felt like. Not this exact flavor of it, but the substance of it, the thing that happened when you kept fighting and kept losing and the enemy just kept being there, permanent and cold and utterly convinced of its own inevitability. What would it take? Harry asked. Brashen looked at him carefully. What do you mean, to stop surviving and start winning? What would it actually take? The silence that followed wasn't blank. It was a silence with history in it, the history of every conversation like this one that had started in hope and ended somewhere worse. Harry watched Brashen work through it, watched Myra set her jaw, watched Oren shift his weight. The deep magic doesn't favor her alone, Brashen said finally. That is a fact she would prefer we didn't know. There is an older magic, deeper magic, some call it, that exists before her claim, before the stone table, before even the long memory. If the right kind of sacrifice were made, if something true and innocent were broken on the table, the older magic would respond. But that is not something I'm willing to let anyone be sacrificed for, Harry said. Brashen blinked. The automatic response of a man who'd expected an argument, not that particular kind of interruption. I wasn't suggesting. I know. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm saying that's not the way. Harry turned the thought over. She has her power because she's been unopposed, not because she's unbeatable. You said her wolves patrol 3-hour routes. Yes, so there are gaps, there are routes she doesn't cover. She has spies beyond the wolf packs, but not everywhere. You're here, aren't you? She doesn't know about this place yet. Myra was watching him with an expression that had moved past suspicion into something more focused. You've been here 2 hours, she said. You don't know this land. You don't know her strength. I know that she's been winning by making you afraid of her and careful around her and convinced that the best you can do is not die, Harry said. I know what that looks like because it's been done to me, and I know that it stops working the moment someone decides it does. Another silence, different quality this time. You're 15, Fenwick said. Yes, Harry said. And I've fought a basilisk, a Hungarian horntail in Valdemar, who is basically what would happen if a Dark Lord decided to make not dying into a personality trait. So, he shrugged. I don't really have a frame of reference where frightening enemy means inevitable. Oren made a sound. It took Harry a moment to identify it as laughter, deep, resonant, slightly surprised laughter, like a sound the bear had forgotten it could make. Myra was almost smiling. Brashen was not smiling, but something behind his eyes had shifted, something that might have been hope, or at least the memory of what hope felt like when it was still a reasonable thing to have. You can't go back, he said. It was a statement, not a question. There's no door, Harry confirmed. I don't know if there's ever going to be a door. I'd rather figure out how to survive in the meantime. Survive, Brashen repeated. And then some, Harry said. He slept that first night curled near the coal fire, with Oren's bulk blocking the worst of the cold from the gap in the stones. His sleep was dreamless for the first time in months. No corridors, no voices, no green light at the edge of vision. He woke once near what he judged to be 3 a.m, when Fenwick came back from scouting and pressed his cold muzzle briefly against Harry's shoulder in a gesture that was entirely wolf and somehow entirely clear. Still safe. Sleep. He slept. In the morning, and morning here was grudging, the light arriving like it resented the effort, gray and thin through the gap in the stone roof. Brashen sat across from him and talked. Really talked in the way that Harry suspected he hadn't in a long time, laying out the state of things with the precision of a man who'd been keeping the information ordered in his mind for years against the day someone might be able to use it. The White Witch's territory extended from the witch's own castle at the center to the sea cliffs in the east, the northern mountains, and the great river in the west, which she'd frozen in the first decade of her rule and hadn't unfrozen since. Her wolf packs were organized in companies of 7, each company responsible for a geographic sector. Her stone army, creatures and Narnians she'd petrified, stood in her courtyard or in transit to it or in the remote reaches as warnings. She couldn't petrify from a distance. It required direct sight in the focus of her wand. Her wand, Harry said. Long, white, she carries it always. Then that's the thing. He met Brashen's eyes. Not her army, not her wolves. The wand. Everything she does runs through it. The petrification, the deep cold, the— Yes, Brashen said. But getting near enough to take it from her. I didn't say take it from her. Not today. Harry pulled his knees up and rested his arms on them, thinking. I said that's the thing, that's the target. Everything else is the noise around it. Myra was at the entrance to the shelter, watching the tree line, but he could see from the set of her shoulders that she was listening. You're talking about a war, Brashen said. Number not yet, I'm talking about a plan. Harry looked up. You said you have contacts, other pockets of resistance scattered. Brashen hesitated. Some, fewer than there were. There are centaur camps in the northern ridges. If they're still there, it's been 8 months since I had word. There are said to be fawn communities in the caves under the eastern cliffs, but then that's where we start. Not fighting, connecting. He held up a hand to forestall the objection he could see forming. She wins because you're all alone. That's not a military assessment, that's the fact of it. Alone you're survivors, together you're a problem. And the bigger the problem gets, the more she has to stretch her attention, and attention is a resource, same as food or wolves. Brashen stared at him. You've done this before, he said. Not this exact thing, but something like it. Harry thought about the DA. He thought about Dumbledore's army, which had started in the Hogshead with 16 people who were tired of being told that defense was unnecessary, that the threat wasn't real, that the people who were supposed to protect them would handle it. He thought about what it had felt like to stand in front of that first meeting and realize that whatever he said next would matter. Sort of, he said, in a smaller way. Yes, you were the leader. I was the person who showed up first. He paused. Which is maybe the same thing sometimes. Orin made another low sound, not laughter this time, but affirmation, the kind of rumble that meant yes, that is true, I have understood that. Fenwick raised his head from his pause. I know the northern ridge approach, the wolf said. 3 days if the eastern passes are still clear. Are they? Possibly. I ran them 6 weeks ago. Then we leave tomorrow, Harry said. He looked at Brashen, if that's agreeable. The old general, the exiled general, the general with no army, looked at this 15-year-old boy from somewhere else entirely and said nothing for a long moment. Then, you're going to need a coat, he said. Myra, what do we have? There's the spare, Myra said from the doorway. It's too big. Big is fine, Harry said. Big is warm. Myra turned from the tree line to look at him, really look at him. For the first time since he'd arrived, the professional suspicion stripped back to something closer to honest assessment. She had the kind of eyes that catalogued everything and offered nothing back for free. You really think this can be won, she said. It was not entirely a question. I think the only reason it hasn't been yet is that nobody's been treating it like it can, Harry said. That's not her strength, that's your habit. She looked at him for another 3 seconds. I'll get the coat, she said. That night, his second night in a frozen world with no door home, Harry sat outside the shelter, on the stone shelf above the cliff, and looked at the sky. The stars were still wrong to him, still arranged in patterns his mind couldn't assign names to, but they were very clear. No light pollution, there was nothing here to pollute. Just the cold and the dark in the vast, uncovered sky above a land that had been hurting for 50 years. He thought about Hogwarts. About Ron, who was probably covering for him in the dormitory. He went to the bathroom, Neville, leave it. And about Hermione, who would be awake because she was always awake, probably rereading something she'd already read in case she'd missed a piece of information she didn't know she needed. He thought about Umbridge, and found that thinking about her from here felt different, smaller, somehow, or not smaller, but less total, like she was one specific problem in a world that contained many problems, and the correct response was strategy rather than dread. He thought about the words on his hand, gone now, faded to almost nothing. He thought about what Brashen had looked like when Harry had asked what would it actually take. He thought about how long it had been since anyone had asked that question out loud. Something moved in the dark below the cliff. He watched it, a shape between the trees, too large and too fluid for a wolf, moving without sound and leaving no tracks in the snow. He couldn't identify it. It stopped for a moment at the edge of the tree line, and he had the very distinct and entirely irrational sensation that whatever it was had seen him, not with the interest of a predator, but with the interest of something that already knew why he was here. Then it was gone. Harry sat with the cold for another few minutes. All right, he said, to no one in particular, to the sky maybe, or to whatever had been moving in the trees, or to the fact of this place and what it needed. All right. He went back inside. The coat was waiting, folded near the coal fire, It was enormous, sized for a centaur's rider, probably, thick brown fur and leather and a series of clasps that took him 3 attempts to work out. He put it on. It came nearly to his knees. Orin watched him with those small, calm eyes. "It suits you," the bear said. Harry laughed, an actual laugh surprised out of him. "It doesn't," he said. "It's ridiculous." "Yes," Orin agreed. "It suits you." Harry pulled the clasps closed and lay down near the fire, and let himself sleep in a frozen world that was already, somehow, beginning to feel like it had been waiting for exactly this. Chapter 2. The long walk north they left before dawn. Myra woke Harry by setting a tin cup of something hot near his face. Not tea, nothing like tea, something that tasted like pine bark and burned honey, and by the time he'd finished it and pulled on the oversized coat and found his wand in his robe's pocket, the others were already packed and waiting. Packed in their case meant what they could carry. It wasn't much. Brashen had a canvas roll across his back containing what Harry suspected was every important thing he still owned in the world. Myra had a pack that clinked occasionally with the sound of glass. She'd caught him looking at it the night before and said medicines without offering more. Orin carried nothing. He was, as Myra pointed out, already enormous. Fenwick led. The wolf moved ahead of them through the forest like smoke, appearing and disappearing between the trees, doubling back occasionally to report with a low sound that wasn't quite a word, but communicated clear or wait in a way Harry understood almost immediately. He found this less surprising than he probably should have. He'd grown up around owls that understood things they had no business understanding. The grammar of intelligent animals felt natural to him in a way that Hogwarts had perhaps accidentally prepared him for. The forest was called the Birch Run, Brashen told him as they walked, or had been called that before the cold. Now the birches were black skeletons in the snow, their bark gone silver-gray and their lower branches bent under ice. Nothing grew beneath them. No undergrowth, no roots reaching for spring. The ground was just packed snow over frozen earth, and their footsteps made almost no sound. "It used to flower in early spring," Myra said. She wasn't looking at the trees when she said it. She was looking at the path ahead, but the words came out differently from how her other words had, not sharp, not measured, just there. "You knew it before," Harry said. "I grew up here. This whole stretch of forest, there were wood dryads in these trees once. They're gone now." She said gone and didn't specify what that meant, and Harry didn't ask because he could hear what the word was carrying. They walked. The first day was hard and quiet and long. The landscape changed as they moved north, the Birch Run thinning into open stretches of bare moorland where the snow was knee-deep and the wind came straight from the mountains with nothing to slow it. Harry cast a warming charm on himself after the first hour in the open, and then, because Myra was walking with her jaw set and her hands balled in her pockets and clearly too proud to ask, he cast one on her too without comment. She shot him a sideways look. "I can feel that," she said. "Good," Harry said. "It's cold," a pause. "Thank you," she said, like the words were being issued under mild protest. Orin had come alongside him by midday, the bear's huge body blocking the wind on Harry's left side, which was either courtesy or just the natural consequence of walking near something that big. Harry appreciated it regardless. "How far is the northern ridge?" he asked. 3 days if the weather holds," Brashen said, without looking up from the ground he was reading. The centaur navigated the terrain with the practice of long familiarity, not by landmarks, Harry realized, but by the land itself. The way slopes and stone formations described a map for those who knew how to read them. 2.5 if we push on through the evening tomorrow. "The weather won't hold," Fenwick said from somewhere ahead, his voice carried back through the open air with no particular inflection, stating a fact. "How do you know?" Harry called. "I can smell it." A pause. "Cold weather has a smell. So does changing cold weather. This is changing cold weather." Harry looked at the sky. It was the same flat gray it had been all morning. He couldn't identify any particular change in it, but he was also a person who thought cloudy was a sufficient meteorological description, which was perhaps not the most useful skill set right now. "We push through the evening tomorrow," he said to Brashen. Brashen glanced at him. "Yes," he said. "I had reached the same conclusion." They rested for an hour in the shelter of a ridge, barely shelter, just enough rock to cut the wind, ate from the packs, and kept moving. Harry asked questions as they walked, because questions were what he had. He knew nothing about this place except what Brashen had given him in the compressed urgent briefing of that first morning, and that wasn't enough. He needed the texture of it, the history, the things that didn't fit neatly into a tactical overview. Brashen talked. Slowly at first, then with more momentum, the way a man talks when he has been the keeper of information for so long that sharing it becomes something close to relief. Narnia had been created, Brashen said, in a way that was impossible to discuss without sounding like mythology and was nonetheless simply true. There had been a lion, there had been a song. The mountains and rivers and creatures were not the products of geological time but of intention, of something that had meant them, and the meaning was still present in the land itself, which was part of why the witch's winter felt like a wound rather than just a weather pattern, because it was. It was being done to something that had been made to be warm. She came through a place between worlds, Brashen said. That much is recorded in the old texts, the ones that survived her purges. She came from a world she had already destroyed, brought herself through with old magic and arrived here, and the land recognized her wrongness immediately. But the creatures didn't all see it. Some were drawn to her, the power of her, the certainty of her. She speaks with such conviction. That is her first weapon before the cold, before the wand, the absolute assurance that she is right. Harry thought about that. She believes it, he said. She's not performing. Number she genuinely believes she is the correct order of things, that warmth is chaos and winter is clarity, that every creature who serves her is better off than they would be free. Brashen's expression was complicated. That is what makes her so difficult to fight. You cannot find the doubt in her. There is no crack where truth gets in. There's always a crack, Harry said. You just have to find what she actually wants. Underneath the certainty there's something she's afraid of losing or afraid of becoming or afraid of not being. That's the crack. Myra turned her head to look at him. And what do you think that is? Harry thought about it for another few paces. Being wrong, he said. That's all, just being wrong. If she's wrong, then everything she's done becomes something other than order. It becomes cruelty. And I think that's the one thing she absolutely cannot be. Silence for a moment. Only the crunch of snow underfoot. You're 15, Myra said again. But the tone was different from last time, less pointed, more like she was reminding herself. Fenwick found the first signs of a wolf patrol at mid-afternoon, tracks in the snow, 7 sets of paw prints, maybe 4 hours old, running east to west across their route. He circled back to report, and they all stood looking at the tracks. They crossed here, Fenwick said. They'll return on the same route, roughly. Meaning they'll be back in something under 3 hours, Harry said, looking at the sky. What time is sunset here? About an hour after this light, when the clouds are thin, Myra said. Today it'll be sooner. Then we cross, cover the tracks, and get past their return route before they come back. He looked at Brashen. Is there cover on the north side of this crossing? Enough to wade in if we misjudge the timing. There is a stand of old stone pines about half a mile north. They're dense enough. Then we go. They crossed quickly. Harry went last, and as he crossed, he cast a careful charm on the snow behind the group. Not exactly an obliteration charm, which he'd learned in theory if not in great practice, but something close enough, smoothing and settling the disturbed snow back toward its original shape. It wouldn't fool a dedicated scout, but it would fool a wolf running a routine patrol without particular reason for suspicion. Fenwick watched him do it. When Harry finished, the wolf moved alongside him and said very quietly, "Where did you learn that?" "School," Harry said. "They teach that at school. They teach a lot of things. Some of them are actually useful." Fenwick made a sound that was, Harry was beginning to recognize, what the wolf did instead of laughing. A controlled exhale through the nose with slightly elevated ears. It meant, "I find this more amusing than I intend to." They reached the stone pines before sunset and waited inside them, pressed back from the edge. 35 minutes later, 7 wolves ran through the crossing below them in a loose pack, fast and businesslike, not investigating, not pausing, following a route. Harry watched them from the shadow of the branches. He counted, watched their spacing and stride, noted the way the lead wolf set the pace and the others matched it, tight formation, eyes forward, no peripheral checking, disciplined, not thinking. The worst kind of guard, in one sense, you couldn't predict an individual response, and the easiest in another, because they weren't curious. He'd learned that at Hogwarts, actually. The Auror who taught a single defense lesson that wasn't complete garbage had said, "The most dangerous enemy isn't the strongest one, it's the one who's still thinking." These wolves were not thinking, they were executing. "She trains them out of initiative," Harry murmured. Brashen beside him said, "Yes, that's useful." "How?" "Because it means the only thing I have to understand is her," Harry said. "Not each individual component, just her. The rest follow whatever pattern she sets." The pack disappeared around a ridge to the west. The sound of them faded. They moved on. They camped that first night in a natural hollow under an overhang of granite, better than the stone shelf, genuinely almost warm with all 5 of them, and the heat of Oren's body, which was considerable. Harry had noticed that the bear generated warmth, the way certain people generated calm, steadily, without effort, as a matter of nature. He sat with Brashen after the others had settled, using the low light of a shielded coal fire to look at the rough map the centaur had drawn in the dirt with a stick. It was a good map, detailed in the areas Brashen knew, marked with honest uncertainty in the areas he didn't. The Centaur companies, Harry said. You called them the Free Ridge camps. What's left of them? Brashen was quiet for a moment. When I was last in contact, there were 3 camps, perhaps 400 individuals in total, but that was 8 months ago, and he stopped. And she was pressing north. There had been raids. I don't know what I'll find, but some of them will be there. Yes, centaurs we are not easy to kill, and we do not surrender. If any of the companies survived the raids, they're still in the ridges. A pause. They may not be in a condition to fight. I'm not asking them to fight yet, Harry said. I'm asking them to exist loudly enough that she has to notice, that's all. Brashen studied the map. You want to be a problem, he said. You said that yesterday. A problem large enough that she has to stretch her attention. Right, because right now she runs Narnia like it's settled territory, patrols, routine, minimal effort. That means she thinks the resistance is finished. The moment she realizes it isn't, she has to make a choice. Concentrate force here and leave somewhere else exposed, or spread thin and accept vulnerability everywhere. He traced a line on the map with his finger, east from the ridge camps toward the cliff communities Brashen had mentioned. 2 nodes of resistance, linked, then a third. Then she's not dealing with scattered survivors. She's dealing with a network. Brashen was silent. You've thought about this, he said finally. I've thought about something like it. Harry looked up. I ran something called Dumbledore's Army. Back home it was smaller scale, but the principle was the same. People alone are afraid. People together remember they're not. Dumbledore's Army, Brashen repeated. Who is Dumbledore? Someone I sometimes disagree with who is nonetheless probably the most powerful wizard alive, Harry said. He paused, trying to find the translation. He's the kind of person who can see 20 moves ahead and is so focused on the game that he occasionally forgets to check if the pieces are all right. Brashen was looking at him with an expression Harry couldn't fully read. And do you see 20 moves ahead? No, Harry said honestly. I see 3, but I'm very good at the 3 I can see, and I'm fast enough on my feet when the 4th one surprises me. The old general looked back at the map. He smoothed the dirt with one hand, resetting it. Started drawing again, more detail this time, the ridgeline topography, the approach routes to the Centaur camps. 3 days, he said. We'll be there in 3 days. A pause. Young are not supposed to be right about things like this. I want you to know I find it somewhat irritating. Harry almost smiled. I'll try to be wrong about something to even it out. Please do, Brashen said, without a trace of humor, and somehow that was funnier than anything else. The second day the weather changed. Fenwick had been right, the cold deepened, which Harry hadn't thought possible until it happened, the temperature dropping through a floor he'd assumed was the bottom and finding more floor beneath it. And then the snow came. Not falling snow, driven snow, horizontal, the kind that found every gap in a coat and wasn't interested in apologies. They pushed on because there was nothing else to do. Harry kept the warming charms running on himself and Myra, and eventually, after the first hour, quietly extended them to cover Brashen too, though the centaur's own hide seemed to manage better than any of them. Orin didn't appear to need it. Fenwick moved through the storm as though it were a mild inconvenience, occasionally circling back to make sure no one had fallen behind. Myra walked next to Harry through most of the storm. Not by any stated arrangement, it just happened that way, the two of them settling into the same stride, heads ducked against the wind. Tell me about your world, she said, at some point in the blinding middle of the afternoon. Her voice had to cut through the wind. What do you want to know? What's warm about it? Something warm. Harry thought for a moment. The Great Hall, he said. At Hogwarts, where I go to school. There are 4 long tables, and the ceiling shows whatever the sky is doing outside, except somehow even when it's showing a storm it doesn't feel threatening. It's just the sky, and you're inside looking at it. And there are floating candles, hundreds of them, and the food just appears, and at Christmas they have 12 trees and— Stop, Myra said. He stopped. That's enough, she said. That's a good picture, they walked on. What happened to your family? Harry asked, because she told him she grew up in the birch run and she was here now, which answered the question in one way but not in any of the ways that mattered. The cold took some of them. Slowly, the way long winters take people, not dramatically, just gradually, less and less food, harder and harder seasons. She paused. Her wolves took my father 6 years ago. He was trying to reach another community, carrying messages, because communication was important and someone had to do it. The words were flat, not cold, just worn smooth. He knew the risk. That doesn't make it less unfair. No, she said. It doesn't. I never said it did. They walked another 100 meters in the storm. What about you? She said. Your family. My parents died when I was 1, Harry said. Murdered by the same person by the reason I was in the castle at night when I found the cabinet. He told them about Voldemort in bare outline the first morning, enough to explain why he'd been out of his dormitory. My aunt and uncle raised me. They don't like magic and they don't like me much, but they keep me fed and housed so. He paused. I've got friends, 2 very good ones, he thought about it. That's my family, really. Myra was quiet for a moment. Then, the 2 friends. Would they be looking for you? Hermione will be in the library right now, systematically working through every magical transportation theory she can find, Harry said with complete confidence. And Ron will be keeping everyone calm and telling people Harry's fine. He'll turn up, stop worrying while internally panicking. Something that might have been a smile crossed Myra's face, quick and private. You know them well. I've nearly died with them several times, Harry said. That does something for familiarity. They pushed through the evening as planned, the storm easing enough by nightfall to allow it. The second camp was rougher, a hollow between 2 rock formations that wasn't so much a shelter as a place where the wind couldn't attack from more than 3 directions instead of 4. Oren slept against the north face and blocked the worst of it. Harry woke twice in the night to cold he couldn't charm away. The temperature dropped further still, genuinely dangerous now, and both times he found Fenwick sitting alert at the hollow's edge, watching. The third morning was clear. The kind of clear that follows a storm and feels almost accusatory, the sky a hard blue-white, the snow glittering, the shadows blue and sharp, everything too bright and too still. After 2 days of gray and battering wind, it felt like a different world. Harry stood at the edge of the hollow in the early morning and looked north, where the ridgeline was visible now for the first time. A dark, jagged line against the sky, mountains proper, not hills. There, Brashen said, coming to stand beside him. The old centaur looked different in the clear light, more himself somehow, or more what he'd been. Harry could see the shape of the general he'd described more clearly when the exhaustion wasn't the first thing the light found. The Free Ridge, another half-day. Are we expected? Number I had no way to send word. He paused. They may not be welcoming, initially. A human from elsewhere with no context. I'll manage, Harry said. I know, that's not entirely what concerns me. Brashen turned to look at him directly, which felt deliberate. You have a way of, he searched for the word, of causing people to rearrange themselves around you. I've watched it for 2 days. Myra does not trust easily. Fenwick is not, by nature, solicitous of humans. Oren makes his decisions privately and doesn't explain them. And yet here we are, walking north because a 15-year-old from somewhere else looked at a problem and said that's not inevitable. He paused. I want to know if you're doing that intentionally. Harry looked at him. No, he said. He thought about it honestly. I just don't think the way things are is the way they have to be. And I say so. I think most people want someone to say so. I don't think that makes me anything special. Most people want someone to say so, Brashen repeated. And then they wait for that person. And sometimes the person arrives. Harry held the centaur's gaze. He knew what was being said underneath those words. He'd heard something like it before, in a different form, from a different kind of man, in a world where prophecy made it sound like fate and fate made it sound like someone else's choice rather than his own. I'm not a prophecy, he said. I'm just someone who showed up. Yes, Brashen said. That is often precisely what is required. The Free Ridge Centaur camp was not what Harry had pictured. He'd been imagining something, fortified, organized, the remnants of a military structure. What he found was closer to a wound trying to close itself. The camp sprawled across a natural plateau on the ridge's south-facing slope, maybe 40 structures made of stone and timber, roughly circular arrangements that suggested something larger in their empty spaces, like a mouth missing half its teeth. There were centaurs, not 400, far from 400. He counted 37 in the first pass of his eyes, and several more in the structures. Less than 100 total. Against whatever 400 had been 8 months ago, this was a disaster made visible. They were seen while still on the approach. 2 scouts, young centaurs, both of them with that particular combination of wariness and aggression that comes from having been attacked too recently, came down the slope with bows drawn. Brashen, one of them said, and the bow lowered slightly. Dara, Brashen said, and something in his voice acknowledged the loss between then and now without naming it. We need to come in. We're 5 and we're not followed. Dara, a young female centaur with dark chestnut coloring and eyes that moved over all of them quickly and clinically, looked at Harry last. Human, she said. Yes, Harry agreed. I'm Harry, I'm not from here, I'm not her, I'm not affiliated with the witch. Brashen can speak to that. He can speak to arriving with you, she said. That isn't the same as vouching. You're right, Harry said. It isn't. If I were going to ask you to trust me on no evidence, I wouldn't deserve it. He held her gaze. So let us in, watch me for a day, and make your own judgment. That's all I'm asking. Another pause. She looked at the other scout, an exchange that contained an entire conversation in 4 seconds, then stepped aside. One day, she said, the camp's leader was named Kane. He was older than Brashen, though the two of them spoke with the familiarity of long colleagues, and he was sitting in the largest of the structures with 2 others, both clearly his counsel, when Brashen brought Harry in. He didn't stand. He took in Harry with the kind of look that belongs to people who have learned not to be surprised by anything, because the world has already produced everything it has to offer in the way of the unexpected. Brashen, he said, you look terrible. You look worse, Brashen said, and sat down with the ease of old friendship. Kane looked at Harry. Who is this? Harry sat down without being invited, because he'd found that waiting to be invited was a way of letting other people set the terms of every conversation before it started. Harry Potter, he said. I came to Narnia by accident and I can't get back yet. I've been here 3 days. I've been talking to Brashen about the state of things and I want to talk to you too if you're willing. Kane's expression was not warm and not hostile. It was the expression of someone who had made peace with the fact that things were as bad as they were and wasn't sure he had energy left for alternatives. Talk then. How many do you have who can fight? 60 at full strength. We have 11 with injuries from the last raid, which brings it to 49, Harry said. When was the last raid? 6 weeks ago. They took 3 prisoners and destroyed 2 of our stores. Did they find this location specifically, or were they running a search pattern? Kane blinked, looked at Brashen, who gave him nothing, looked back at Harry. Search pattern, he said slowly. They've been working north quadrant by quadrant. They don't have us pinpointed. Then you have a window. Harry leaned forward slightly. Not for fighting, not yet, for moving. There's an approach to the eastern cliffs where Myra's people are if they're still there that bypasses the northern wolf routes entirely. If you move your whole camp to a position between here and there, you're not just hiding anymore. You're positioned. And the moment the eastern cliff communities know there are 49 centaurs half a day's travel away, we're not 49 soldiers, one of Kane's counselors said sharply. We're 49 survivors. There are children here. There are injured. I know, Harry said, and the way he said it stopped the objection. Not harshly, just as a statement of fact. I'm not asking anyone to fight before they're ready. I'm saying, right now you're a target that's been found once and will be found again because you're stationary. If you move with purpose, you become harder to find and better positioned for every option, including the option of not fighting at all if that's what it comes to. The counselor sat back, not convinced but listening. What do you get out of this? Kane asked. He was still watching Harry with that flat, careful expression. You're from elsewhere. You could be surviving, hiding. Why are you here in my camp telling me how to position my people? Harry looked at him. Because they're your people, he said, and she's doing to you what's been done to people I care about, and I happen to know it can be fought. He paused. I'm not asking you to trust me with anything except the conversation. What you do after we're done talking is yours. A long silence. The fire in the structure crackled. Outside, the clear hard light of the post-storm morning was starting to warm, very slightly, fractionally, the air above the ridge. Not warmth, really, just the least possible cold. Kane looked at Brashen. You brought him here. He told me what he wanted to do, and I couldn't find a flaw in it, Brashen said simply. That, Kane said, is either encouraging or deeply alarming. Yes, Brashen agreed. I've been sitting with that myself. Kane looked back at Harry. The flat expression had shifted, almost invisibly, into something that was trying not to be hope and not entirely succeeding. Tell me about this approach to the eastern cliffs, he said. Harry nodded and started talking. He was still talking 3 hours later. By the time Myra pulled him aside for food, a bowl of something that was warm and that he ate without asking what it was because warmth was warmth, he had gone through the approach route twice, worked through the patrol pattern problem with Dara, who had turned out to have an excellent tactical mind and a grudging willingness to engage it, and spent 40 minutes listening to a centaur named Foss describe the last raid in exact detail because the detail mattered and he'd asked for it. Myra handed him the bowl and watched him eat. Well, she said. Well, what? How many people do you think you convinced? None yet, Harry said between bites. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything. I'm trying to give them enough information to make a good decision. He paused. Convincing is what you do when you want people to do what you've decided. That's not what this is. She looked at him for a long moment. The sharp-tongued professional suspicion had been doing something complicated for the last day and a half, not disappearing, but rearranging itself into something more like sharp-tongued engagement, which was its own different thing. You're going to be irritating to know, she said. Probably, Harry admitted. I've been told. By the 2 friends, the panicking one and the library one, mainly by the library one. Ron thinks I'm brilliant, which is very loyal of him and almost entirely wrong. He finished the bowl. Hermione, though, he thought of her, the particular exhausting wonderful quality of being properly known by someone. Hermione would look at what I'm doing right now and tell me 12 things I haven't thought of yet. I might tell you 12 things you haven't thought of yet, Myra said. I know, Harry said. I was hoping you would. She looked at him, a long, direct, assessing look. Then she sat down next to him, cross-legged in the snow, and said, the Eastern Cliff communities, you need to know something about them before we go. Myra's people, my people, they're not organized the way Brashen's people are. We don't have a military structure. We have councils, and the councils argue, and the arguments take time, and how do you short-circuit an argument? Harry asked immediately. She blinked. What, in your councils? When there's a decision that needs to be made fast and the argument is going in circles. What actually works? She thought about it. Someone has to name the fear, she said slowly. The actual fear underneath the argument, because usually the argument isn't about the decision, it's about whatever the decision represents. She paused. Why do you ask? Because that's what I'll do, Harry said simply. When we get there. Myra stared at him. Then quietly, do you know what you're asking me? You're asking me to take you to my people, to what's left of my family, and introduce you as what? A boy who fell out of a magical cabinet and has a plan. Yes, Harry said, and you think that will work. I think, Harry said carefully, that you've been carrying this for a long time by yourself, and I think you don't have to anymore. He met her eyes. I'm not here to take anything over. I'm here to help you do what you already know needs doing. That's all this is. The wind moved through the ridge camp. The hard blue sky sat above them, cold and clear and enormously large. Somewhere below the ridge, far to the south, the White Witch's wolves were running their roots with the patient confidence of things that believed they had already won. Myra looked at her hands, then at the ridge, then at Harry. Fine, she said, but I'm doing the introductions. You stand behind me and you keep your mouth shut until I say. Completely fair, Harry said, and you have to get rid of that coat, she added. You look like you're wearing a tent. The coat stays, Harry said. It's warm. It's ridiculous. It's warm and ridiculous, Harry said. In this weather, the former wins. She stood up, brushing snow from her legs. She was not smiling. She was, however, doing the thing where her mouth held the memory of a smile without letting it happen, which Harry was beginning to recognize as Myra's version of the same thing. He stood up, too. The ridge stretched away in both directions, stone and ice and that hard winter light. Below in the camp, Orin was visible, enormous and brown and unmistakable, sitting with a group of centaur children who had apparently decided he was interesting, which Harry felt was very good judgment on their part. Tomorrow they would move toward the eastern cliffs. Tonight there was a camp full of people who had stopped expecting things to change, and he was going to sit with them through the evening and learn their names and listen to what they'd lost and not offer any comfort that wasn't honest. That, he'd learned, mattered more than strategy. It was the thing the strategy sat on top of. He looked north, where the mountains went up into cloud. Somewhere in there, or everywhere in it, was the cold that had come with Jaddies and stayed for 50 years and would keep going until something changed the equation of what she was dealing with. He was going to be that something. Not because he was chosen or fated, or because a prophecy pointed at him with its cold, impersonal finger. Because he was here, and he could, and somebody had to. He went to learn the names of the people in the camp. Chapter 3. Fire in the long winter, the eastern cliff communities were not in the caves. That was the first thing Harry learned when they arrived, 5 days after leaving the ridge camp. 5 days of moving careful and quiet through terrain that got harder the further east they went, the snow deepening, the trees giving way to bare stone and ice-sheeted rock faces, the wolf patrol routes thickening the way traffic thickens near a city center. The caves were empty. Cold fire pits, abandoned bedding, a child's carved wooden toy left in a corner that Myra picked up and held for 3 seconds before setting it back down. They moved, Fenwick said, reading the ground with his nose. Months ago, not in panic, they took things with them. This was deliberate. Then they're somewhere else, Harry said. Can you track them? Given time, take it. While Fenwick worked, Harry stood in the mouth of the main cave and looked out at the eastern sea. He could see it from here, or the edge of it, a gray-white smear at the horizon where frozen ocean met frozen sky. The cliffs dropped 300 feet to pack ice below. The wind off the water was extraordinary, a living thing that shoved rather than blew, and the cold it carried was different from the forest cold, older, wetter, more permanent. Myra was somewhere behind him in the caves, moving through the spaces she'd grown up in. She hadn't said anything since they'd found them empty, and he'd left her to it. Brashen came to stand beside him at the cave mouth. The old centaur looked at the sea for a long moment. She pushed them out, he said. Looks like they pushed themselves out first, Harry said, deliberately, before she got here. Someone warned them, or someone in that community was thinking ahead. He turned. Which means there's a leader in that community who's been running a version of the same calculation we have. That's useful. Brashen looked at him. You find the silver edge in everything. Not everything. I just don't see the point of dwelling on the other bit before I know what it means. He paused. Myra needs a minute. Give her that. Brashen nodded and moved back into the cave. Fenwick found the trail in 2 hours, not fresh but clear enough. The cliff communities had moved inland and north, skirting the mountain foothills in a direction that was either intuitive or guided by someone who knew the patrol gaps. They'd gone well, no stumbling, no doubling back, a practiced departure. They followed the trail for a day and a half before the lookout found them. It wasn't dramatic. They were crossing a narrow defile between 2 rock walls when Harry simply felt the attention on them, that particular quality of being watched by someone who hasn't decided yet whether you're a problem. He stopped walking. The others stopped with him. We know you're there, Harry said, to the rock wall on their left, at a height of about 20 feet. We're not her people. We're looking for the community that left the eastern caves. A pause. Nothing happened. The fawn in our group grew up in those caves, Harry continued. Her name is Myra. If you have anyone who'd recognize her, now would be a good time. Another pause. Then a figure appeared at the top of the rock wall, a young male fawn, barely older than Harry, with a sling in his hand and an expression that was trying very hard to be threatening and mostly achieving extremely nervous. He looked at Myra. His face changed entirely. Myra, he said. Tam, Myra said. Her voice did something complicated. You absolute idiot, I nearly had a heart attack. I had a sling, Tam said with great dignity. You had a rock on a string, Myra said. Get down here. The community, roughly 200 fawns, dwarves, and a scattering of talking animals, had made their new settlement in a bowl-shaped valley hidden between 2 ridge lines, accessible only through the defile and 2 other approaches that were both watched. It was better than the caves, Harry thought, harder to approach in force, defensible, and it had a stream running through the center that hadn't frozen because it moved too fast and came from too deep in the earth to succumb to surface cold. The council met them the same evening. 7 of them seated around a fire in the largest structure, a long hall of stone and rough-cut timber, the roof held up by pillars carved with designs that were too worn to read clearly, but that had the feeling of something meaningful. Myra sat with Harry. Brashen stood to one side. Orin and Fenwick waited outside. Orin because he was too large for the hall, Fenwick because he'd said, simply, I don't do councils, which Harry felt was his right. The council leader was a dwarf named Hesta. Broad, sharp-eyed, with gray-streaked hair, and the kind of stillness that comes from years of having to be the calmest person in the room regardless of circumstance. She looked at Harry the way Kane had looked at him, that same flat evaluation, and Harry recognized the look now for what it was. Not hostility, the practiced neutrality of someone who'd had to stop being surprised by how wrong people could be and was testing whether he was more of the same. Myra speaks for you, Hesta asked. Myra speaks with me, Harry said. She doesn't speak for me, I can do that myself. Hesta's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes did. Then speak. He did. He laid it out the same way he'd laid it out for Kane. No performance, no rallying rhetoric, just the actual state of things as he understood them. The ridge camp, the numbers, the patrol patterns, the window, the witch's single point of vulnerability, the network that didn't yet exist and what it would mean for her when it did. He spoke for 20 minutes and then he stopped and waited. The council argued. Not with him, with each other mostly. The accumulated pressure of old disagreements, finding this new context to run through. Harry sat and listened and didn't interrupt because the arguments were telling him things that useful rhetoric couldn't, what they were really afraid of, what had failed before, who in this room had the most scar tissue. The fear he identified after half an hour was not about the witch directly. It was about hope. They had organized before. They had made plans before. 2 of the people at this table had lost family in those previous organizing attempts. The fear was not she will find us, they were already managing that, but we will try again and lose again, and I cannot survive losing again. He waited for the right moment. It came when one of the older council members, a fawn who had the particular quality of someone who had been a voice of caution for so long that caution had become indistinguishable from despair, said, We are alive because we have been careful. The careful approach has been working for 50 years, Harry said, not loudly but clearly. And you're still in a hidden valley watching the number of people in this room get smaller. Silence, the blunt edge of it. Careful kept you alive, he continued. I'm not criticizing that. It's real, it matters. You made a good call. But careful is what you do when surviving is the best available option. Right now there is a better available option. And I know that's the hardest thing to believe after 50 years. I know that because he paused. Because the person who's done this to you has made absolutely sure that every time you started to believe it, something happened to change your mind. She's not just winning militarily, she's winning here. He touched his own temple. And that is the war that matters more. Hesta was watching him. She'd been watching him the whole time with that flat, evaluating stillness. "What do you need from us?" she said. "Not what are you proposing or what are you asking. What do you need?" Present tense. Practical. Harry looked at her. "Runners," he said. "People who know the terrain between here and the Ridge camp well enough to move between them in any weather. A count of what you can spare for a mobile supply line. And one person with authority who's willing to meet with Kane. That's all, for now," Harry said. "The rest depends on what we find when the pieces are together." Hesta looked around the table. The old cautious fawn was studying the fire. Two of the younger council members were already leaning forward, the body language of people who have been waiting for something to push against and have just found it. One of them, a female dwarf with iron-gray braids and scars on both hands, was looking at the door as though she was already calculating the route to the Ridge camp. "We'll give you 3 days," Hesta said, "to demonstrate that your Ridge camp contact is what you say it is." She looked at Myra. "Your vouching carries weight here. You understand what that means?" "Yes," Myra said. "I understand." Hesta nodded once and the council was over. Outside, Orin was sitting with a group of dwarf children who had apparently been drawn to him by the same impulse that made moths approach light. Several of them were leaning against his side. He looked entirely comfortable with this. Fenwick was sitting apart, watching the valley's northern approach with automatic vigilance. Harry sat next to the wolf and didn't say anything for a minute. "It's going to work," Fenwick said without being asked. "Something will work," Harry said. "Whether it's this specific version," he shrugged. "It'll be something like this, the shape of it's right. You've been in wars before," Fenwick said. "Number I've been in encounters, fights, a tournament that tried to kill me." He thought about the graveyard. The cold stone under his knees and Cedric Diggory's body and the sound of Voldemort's voice, entirely certain, entirely in control. "Nothing like this, but you know how to do this." "I know how to be the person in the room who says it's possible," Harry said. "I don't always know how to be the person who makes it stay possible when things go wrong." He looked at the wolf. "That's what I need all of you for. I'm not brash and knows tactics. Myra knows these people. You know this land better than any of us. He paused. "I'm the thing in the middle." Fenwick was quiet. "The hinge," he said. "Yeah," Harry said. "The hinge." Over the next 3 weeks, the hinge did its job. Time moved differently here than Harry expected, not slowly, not dreamily, but with a kind of compression that came from fullness. Every day had something in it that required everything he had. He ran himself hard and didn't notice it the way he might have at Hogwarts, where exhaustion was something that happened between homework and Quidditch practice. Here it was simply the texture of days. The runner network took shape first. 12 fawns from the Cliff community, 4 young centaurs from the Ridge camp, 2 wolverines who were talking animals with an absolute gift for moving through terrain undetected, and a negotiation style that was blunt to the point of being genuinely refreshing. They established routes, timing patterns, coded signals, nothing elaborate, because elaborate broke down under pressure. Harry had learned that lesson from Hermione, who had designed the DA coins with exactly this in mind. Simple, clear, direct. He thought about that, about Hermione's particular genius for systems, the way she saw structural problems in a way that he didn't, and the gap her absence left in his thinking. He tried to fill it by asking more questions, by assuming there were things he hadn't thought of and actively soliciting them. Myra caught on to this strategy almost immediately and began preemptively offering the 12 things she'd promised, which was, in practice, one of the most valuable things that happened during those 3 weeks. Kane and Hesta met on the 7th day in a neutral location between the 2 camps, a frozen streambed halfway between the ridge and the valley, with both parties bringing 4 representatives each. Harry sat in on the meeting but didn't lead it. He watched Brashen navigate the diplomatic terrain with the skill of someone who'd been doing this before Harry was born, which was both reassuring and instructive, and he took notes in his head about how Kane and Hesta communicated, the points of friction, the shared language, the places where the argument needed a bridge. He built the bridge twice, briefly, both times by asking a question rather than making a statement. "What would you need to feel confident about that? And what does that look like from your position?" Simple questions, the kind that worked because they were honest rather than tactical. By the end of the meeting, the 2 communities were not allied in any formal sense, but they were talking about being allied. That was enough for now. The first real fight happened on the 19th day, not a pitched battle, nothing that large or organized. A wolf patrol found one of the runner routes by accident. Not by tracking, just by the brutal randomness of patrol patterns, occasionally intersecting with the thing they were looking for. Harry was with Myra and two of the Centaur runners, halfway between the ridge and the valley on a resupply run, when Fenwick's signal came, a specific 3-beat howl that meant immediate threat your position. Harry had his wand out before the echo of the third beat died. They came from the east, 6 wolves, not a full patrol, which meant they'd either split or caught up with the rest later. They were running hard, no hesitation, targeting the Centaur runners first because the Centaurs were largest. Standard predator logic. Harry stepped between them and the lead wolf and said, "Expelliarmus," which was instinctual, which he'd been saying since third year under pressure, and then realized immediately that a wolf didn't carry anything to be expelled and switched to stupefy in the same breath, catching the lead wolf mid-stride. It went down hard. The second wolf veered. Harry tracked it left, cast again, stupefy, direct hit, and then Fenwick was there, slamming into the third wolf with his full weight and speed, and the Centaur runners had turned and were moving, drawing bows from their backs with the smooth efficiency of people who'd practiced this enough that it was no longer quite deliberate. The whole thing lasted less than a minute. 4 wolves were stunned. One had retreated when the lead went down. The last one, stood 15 feet from Harry, chest heaving, looking at him with those dark, intelligent eyes. Harry looked back. "Run," he said. "Go back to her and tell her something is changing here. Tell her the careful approach is over." The wolf stared. "Go," Harry said, and put something in his voice, not anger, not threat, but certainty. The same certainty he'd used in Hesta's council hall. The wolf ran. One of the Centaur runners, Dara, who had been his most effective scout since their first meeting, came alongside Harry. "You let it go deliberately," she said. "Yes, why? Because a patrol that disappears makes her think what is here that I don't know about. A patrol that returns with a message makes her think what is this, and how do I address it? One of those responses has her looking everywhere. The other has her looking at me." Dara was quiet for a moment. "And you want her looking at you?" "I want her attention focused," Harry said. "A focused enemy makes predictable moves." Myra, checking the stunned wolves, making sure they were merely unconscious, nothing permanent, which Harry appreciated without having to articulate why, looked up at him. "That is either very clever or very dangerous." "Both," Harry said. "Ideally both." The message got through. They knew it 3 days later when the patrol patterns shifted. The routes contracted slightly, consolidating around the northern approaches to the witch's castle. Not a massive redeployment, a recalibration, the subtle defensive instinct of something that had heard a noise it couldn't identify. Brashen sat with Harry that evening and they read the new patterns together in the dirt map. "She's not certain we're a threat yet," Brashen said. "She's being cautious. She's buying us time," Harry said. "Without meaning to, every day she's recalibrating instead of moving is a day the network gets stronger. You're using her caution against her." "She's been using your caution against you for 50 years, Harry said. "It's a fair trade." Brashen looked at the map for a long time. Then he looked at Harry and said something he'd clearly been holding for a while. "The things you know about fighting, not the spells, the thinking, where did that come from, in your world?" Harry was quiet for a moment. He thought about it honestly. "Voldemort," he said. "Everything I know about fighting someone who's certain they've already won, I learned it from being on the receiving end of it." He paused. "And from a man named Dumbledore, who taught me that power isn't always the most important resource. Sometimes the most important resource is someone who refuses to act like they've lost." "Dumbledore," Brashen said. "The chess player." "The chess player," Harry confirmed. "And you?" "I don't play chess the way he does." Harry looked at the map. "I think I play it the way Ron does, aggressively and with more sacrifice than the other person expects." "Your friend who is currently panicking," Brashen said, with a trace of something that might, in another world, have been fond. "Currently panicking," Harry agreed. "Yes." The alliance formalized on the 28th day, in the long hall of the Valley settlement, with Cain and Hesta sitting side by side, an image that Myra told him afterward hadn't happened in living memory, not because the two peoples were enemies, but because proximity had always felt, during the long cold years, like a luxury that could be stripped away. Like attaching yourself to someone was only giving the cold more targets. Harry didn't speak at the formal meeting. He sat at the back with Fenwick and watched Brashen work, and watched the two communities find their shared language, and felt the room change temperature in a way that had nothing to do with the coal fires. Afterward, Hesta found him outside. "You arranged this," she said, not an accusation, a statement of fact in the voice of someone who wanted him to know that she knew. "Brashen arranged this," Harry said. "I pointed in a direction." "That is still something," Hesta said. She looked at him with those flat, sharp eyes. "How old are you really?" 15. "You don't act 15. I've had an unusual few years. He paused. I've also been here a month. I think this place has, he looked for the word. I think it's condensed something, like when you have to grow up fast because there's no alternative. Narnia does that, Hesta said, without particular bitterness. It gives you the time you need by making the need urgent enough. She looked toward the valley. The fires inside the structures threw warm orange light against the stone walls. In the dark and cold it looked from the outside like something alive. When this is over, if it's ever over, what do? You go back. That's the plan, Harry said, if the door ever opens again. And if it doesn't, he looked at the sky. The wrong stars, the too large moon, the cold that had been going on for 50 years. Then I do this, he said simply. I'm already doing it. The battle, when it came, was not the battle Harry had been planning for. He'd been thinking in terms of a slow build, more communities, larger network, gradually making the problem too large for Jadis to ignore safely. What he hadn't accounted for was that the wolf he'd sent back with a message hadn't just told her something was changing. It had told her something was organizing. And Jadis, whatever else she was not stupid. The army came from the west, moving fast, faster than the patrol patterns had suggested she could mobilize, which meant she'd been holding a reserve that Brashen's intelligence hadn't known about. 300 wolves, 24 soldiers of the kind that Harry had only heard described. Human-shaped but wrong, stone-pale and cold, armed with spears and short curved swords, moving with the mechanical efficiency of creatures who experienced neither fear nor fatigue. They came at dawn. The lookouts had 2 hours warning, which was not enough and had to be made to be enough. Harry was awake and moving before the first alarm. Some combination of his own training and the month of light sleeping had rewired his response to threat, and the deep animal certainty that something was wrong came before the sound of the signal. He dressed, found his wand, and went to find Brashen. The old general was already in the center of the valley, calm with the particular calm of a mind that had finally found its context again, the bad context, the hard context, but the one it understood. He had the map out and was talking to Dara and 2 of the dwarf fighters from Hesta's community. She's splitting them, he said to Harry without preamble. The primary force comes up the main defile. A secondary force, smaller, is flanking around the northern ridge approach. She's trying to close both exits. She knows our layout, Harry said. The returned wolf must have communicated more than you intended. My fault, Harry said immediately. No point in anything else. What do we have? 46 centaur fighters. 60 of Hesta's people who can fight. 12 runners who are not fighters but can throw things from height, and whatever you can do. He looked at Harry. The numbers are badly against us. Numbers are only part of it, Harry said. He was thinking fast, running the terrain in his head as he'd learned it over the past month. The defile, the North Ridge approach, the valley bowl, the stream. The defile is the choke point. They can't bring 300 wolves through it in force, it's too narrow. They have to thin their line. If we hold the defile, we can't hold it forever. We don't need forever. We need long enough for the northern flankers to hit resistance. He turned to Dara. Can you get 20 archers to the high approach before the flank force arrives? Dara's eyes flicked to Brashen, who gave her nothing, and back to Harry. 30 minutes, possibly. You have 25. He looked at Brashen. The defiled defense, that's yours. You know how to do this. Brashen straightened. Something about the way he'd been carrying his shoulders shifted, an old burden settling into an old familiar shape. Yes, he said, I do. I'm going to the defile entrance, Harry said. To do what? Make the opening of this fight memorable, Harry said. Buy Dara the 30 minutes. He stood at the entrance to the defile alone, wand in hand in the gray pre-dawn dark, and waited for them. They came out of the trees in a column, the wolves in front, the pale soldiers behind. The lead wolf stopped when it saw him, a single figure, small against the stone walls of the defile, standing still. Harry could see the confusion running through the column, the wolves slowing, the soldiers closing behind them, the hesitation of an organized force that has run into something that doesn't fit its pattern. He raised his wand. What came out was not exactly a spell he'd learned at Hogwarts. It was a thing that happened in the space where Hogwarts training met a month in a magical land made from a song, something that came from understanding that this world had its own deep magic, and that his wand responded to intention as much as incantation, and that what he needed right now was not finesse. Light. Vast, searing, brilliant white light that bloomed from the tip of his wand and filled the defile entrance and went out in all directions like a second dawn, and in it the front rank of wolves flinched and stumbled, and the soldiers behind them broke their formation for the first time. He walked toward them. The Patronus came without being called. He hadn't cast it, hadn't spoken the incantation. It simply arrived, the stag, enormous and luminous and striding forward with him, its light filling the defile, and the wolves at the front were backing up now, pressing into the ones behind them, creating exactly the compression and disorder in a narrow space that Brashen would make lethal from the ridge above. Harry pointed his wand at the lead wolf and said very clearly, "You're going back." The wolf snapped at him, lunged, actually, a full aggressive charge. Harry stepped aside, cast once, not a stunning spell, something harder, and the wolf hit the defile wall and stayed down. "Anyone else?" Harry said. The second wolf, the third, they came in a wave. He moved through them the way he'd been fighting things larger than himself since he was 12 years old, not with force but with precision, stepping and turning and never quite where they aimed at. Spells snapping out rapid and clean. The Patronus stag wheeling and driving and filling the narrow space with light that the wolves couldn't endure. Above, he could hear Brashen. The organized thunder of centaur hooves on stone, arrows from the ridge, the disciplined, terrible sound of 46 people who had been waiting for this for months and were done waiting. He held the entrance for 27 minutes. He knew the exact number because he counted, an old habit from Quidditch, where keeping time in your head was the difference between a well-judged play and a collision. 27 minutes of movement and light and the absolute refusal to give ground. Then Dara's signal came, 3 sharp notes from above, and he pulled back into the defile and let Brashen's line close behind him. The battle lasted 4 hours. Harry lost track of counting. He moved where he was needed, the north approach when the flank pressed too hard, back to the defile when the wolf column reorganized, twice to the valley floor when the perimeter briefly broke and needed closing. He didn't think about it strategically in those moments. He just moved and fought and trusted Brashen to hold the larger picture. The pale soldiers were the hardest. The wolves he understood. They fought like predators, and predators had patterns. The soldiers had no pattern he could identify except forward. They didn't react to pain the way living things did, and stunning spells slowed but didn't stop them properly. He found by accident and then by repetition that a combination of force, a blasting charm at close range, aimed at their weapon hands, and heat disrupted them in a way that pure stunning didn't. He didn't ask himself what they were. He'd ask Brashen later. Right now they were the thing between him and the people he needed to protect. Myra was fighting in the valley. He saw her twice, quick glimpses in the chaos, the flash of her coat, the efficiency of someone defending territory they knew in their bones. She moved through the stone structures of the settlement like she'd designed them, using every corner and elevation, coordinating the civilian defense with the focused fury of someone who had been angry about this for a very long time and finally had somewhere to put it. Orin was in the valley center, and he was extraordinary and terrifying in the way only something enormous and gentle can be when its gentleness finally finds its limit. He didn't fight often. When he did, it ended quickly. Fenwick was everywhere. At the 4th hour something changed. The attack faltered. Not broken, not retreating in disorder, but faltering, the forward pressure easing, the wolves pulling back from the defile in a way that was too organized to be defeat, more like withdrawal, a decision made from somewhere else. Harry stood at the defile entrance, breathing hard, watching them go. "She's recalled them," Brashen said, coming up beside him. The centaur had an arrow wound on his left flank, shallow but real, and was ignoring it with the severity of someone who'd been ignoring worse for a long time. Not a rout, a recall. "Why?" Harry said. "Because this didn't work the way she expected," Brashen said. "She committed significant force and didn't achieve a decisive result. She'll reassess." "She didn't know what she was hitting," Harry said. "She expected isolated survivors. She got something else." They stood side by side in the defile entrance and watched the last shapes disappear into the trees. The valley behind them was damaged but standing. 2 of the outer structures were destroyed. There were injuries, more than Harry wanted to count, though he would count them, because not counting was the kind of comfortable dishonesty that caused worse damage later. 3 dead. A young dwarf fighter, one of the centaur runners who had been at the wrong approach at the wrong moment, and Tam, Myra's childhood friend, the young fawn with the sling, who had gone to warn a group of civilians that a section of the perimeter had moved and hadn't come back in time. Harry found Myra at the far end of the valley, sitting on a stone with her back against the rock wall, not crying, past the point where crying was the available response. He sat next to her. He didn't say anything. He'd learned at some point in the last month that the most useful thing he could offer in these moments was simply the quality of not going away. After a long time, she said, he had a sling. "I know he was going to be terrible at this," she said. "He was too cheerful for it. He would have been hopeless on patrol, and we would have had to find other things for him to do, and he would have been brilliant at those other things." She stopped. "He was my friend since I was 7 years old." I know, Harry said again. The cold moved through the valley, which was quieter now than it had been in weeks, the way places get quiet after the loudest thing happens. Is this what it always costs? She said. Harry thought of Cedric Diggory. He thought of that name, the weight of that name, the specific gravity of a death that was unnecessary in a way that felt like a personal accusation. Sometimes, he said, yes, sometimes this is what it costs, and it doesn't stop mattering. It's not supposed to stop mattering. He looked at his hands. But it's also not supposed to be the end of the thing you're doing, because if it is, then what Tam did doesn't mean what it should mean. Myra was quiet for a long time. I hate that you're right about that, she said. I know, Harry said. I hate it too. That night, the valley was exhausted and grieving and very much alive. Fires burned in all the structures. People moved between them, the two communities fully mixed now. The formal distinction between Ridge Camp and Cliff Community dissolved by the day in a way that 3 weeks of diplomacy hadn't managed. Disaster as a form of cohesion, which was one of the more brutal lessons Harry had collected. He was sitting outside, looking at the sky when he felt it. Not heard, felt. A presence that wasn't physical, or wasn't only physical, something that registered at a frequency below sound and above silence, a quality of weight and warmth in the cold air that had nothing to do with weather. He turned. At the valley's northern edge, where the stream came down from the rocks, there was a shape in the dark. Large, moving with a silence that was different from Fenwick's careful silence, not strategic, not trained, just the natural quiet of something enormous that chose how much sound to make. Gold, tawny gold, with a mane that the darkness couldn't quite absorb. Harry stood up. They looked at each other across the length of the valley in the dark and the cold and the aftermath of the first real battle of whatever this was becoming. Aslan, and it was Aslan. Harry knew this the way you know something that bypasses the part of the brain that requires evidence. Aslan looked at him with eyes that were old in a way that didn't have a number attached to it, and golden, and full of something that Harry couldn't name but that he had felt once before, in the mirror of Arist, when he'd been 11 years old, and had looked into a mirror that showed you your deepest want and had seen his parents' faces. He looked like the thing you wanted most to see. Harry stayed very still. The lion moved, not toward him, sideways, along the edge of the valley, pausing at the place where the 3 fires marked the dead. He stood there for a long moment. Then he looked at Harry again. Harry walked toward him. He didn't think about whether this was safe or wise. He didn't think much about anything. He walked until he was 15 feet away and stopped because something about the remaining distance felt like something that had to be the lion's choice, not his. Aslan made no sound. He regarded Harry with those impossible eyes. His breath in the cold air was visible, 2 slow clouds that dissipated like the most patient thing Harry had ever seen. Harry said the only thing that came to him, I don't know if I'm doing this right. The lion held his gaze for another moment. Then he simply turned and walked back into the dark at the valley's edge, and was gone, leaving no tracks in the snow, leaving only the faint warmth in the air that lasted approximately 30 seconds before the cold reclaimed it. Harry stood where he was for a long time after, not looking for more, not waiting for instructions, just sitting with the feeling of having been seen by something that already knew everything it needed to know and had shown up anyway. That, he thought, was either the strangest comfort he'd ever experienced or the most profound acknowledgement of the question he hadn't known he was asking. He walked back to the fire. Tomorrow there would be more to do. There was always more to do. Injured to check on, structures to reinforce, Brashen's tactical reassessment, the question of the network's next node, the ongoing problem of Jadis's next move. The work was enormous and it wasn't close to done, and 3 people he'd known were dead in the snow. But the lion had come on this night of all nights and had stood at the place where the dead were marked and had looked at Harry across the dark as though Harry's being here was not an accident. He sat down by the fire and held his hands out toward the warmth and let that be enough. Chapter 4. The Stone Hall. Time in Narnia moved like water over stone, not quickly, not slowly, but with the particular persistence of something that was going to get where it was going regardless. Harry stopped counting days somewhere around the 4th month. Not because he lost track, but because the counting started to feel like something he was doing to hold on to a world he was further from every morning he woke up in this one. He stopped counting and started living, and the difference between those two things turned out to be everything. The network grew. Not fast. Nothing in a frozen land under perpetual military threat moved fast, but with the steadiness of something that had found its own momentum. After the Valley Battle, 3 more communities came to them. Not because of Harry particularly, but because word of the battle traveled through the resistance channels the runners had built, and what the word said was not "we won." They hadn't, not decisively, but we held. In 50 years of the witches' winter, holding against a concentrated assault was the closest thing to a miracle that most people had the vocabulary for. A second centaur camp, 40 miles further along the ridge. A community of talking beavers near the frozen river's eastern bank, quiet, pragmatic, extraordinarily good at logistics. A clan of red dwarves from the mountain foothills who arrived without announcement one morning, led by a female dwarf named Gret who had a scar across her jaw and an economy of expression that Harry found immediately restful. She looked at him, looked at the map, looked at the camp and said, "What do you need built?" He'd loved her immediately. Gret built the stone hall in 6 weeks. It was her idea, or her pragmatic response to Harry's problem, which was that the resistance had grown to the point where coordination required a fixed point, and a fixed point required a structure, and a structure in this landscape required someone who understood stone the way a musician understands their instrument. The hall wasn't large. It wasn't grand. It was a long rectangle of fitted stone in the valley's most defensible corner, with a roof that could bear the weight of 4 feet of snow, walls thick enough to muffle sound, and a door of iron-banded oak that Gret installed with the quiet satisfaction of someone who has solved an important problem correctly. Inside, a central table, carved from a single piece of granite, around which 30 people could sit, 12 sleeping alcoves, a kitchen at the east end, a map room at the west, with Brashen's accumulated tactical maps pinned to a board of rough wood that Orin had carried from somewhere without being asked. The first full council meeting at the stone hall had 29 people around the table and felt like something beginning. Harry grew into command the way he'd grown into the oversized coat. It was too big for him at first, then it fit, then it was just what he wore. He didn't think about it in those terms. He thought about specifics. This runner route needs adjusting, that communities' food stores won't last the next cold surge. Kane and Hesta are circling an old argument that needs a new frame before it consumes a week of everyone's energy. He thought about individuals, who was burning out, who had potential that wasn't being used, who was carrying grief that had started to calcify into something more dangerous. He thought about jaddies constantly, the way you think about weather in a mountain camp. Always there, always relevant, never the only thing. He was 15. He was also somehow not only 15. The month had done something to him, and then the months after that had done more, and the thing being done wasn't aging exactly. He didn't feel older in the way people meant when they said someone was old for their years. He felt more present, like Narnia had looked at the distracted, half-absent version of himself, the one who sleepwalked through Hogwarts carrying Voldemort's shadow like a second backpack, and replaced it with someone who actually took up the space he was standing in. He noticed this first in a conversation with Brashen, about 6 months in, when the old centaur was walking him through a tactical problem with a particular corridor of approach, and Harry realized, midway through listening, that he'd already solved it. Not impressively, not with special insight. He'd just been paying close enough attention to everything for long enough that the answer was sitting there waiting to be acknowledged. He solved it, and Brashen stared at him for 3 seconds. "I'm going to find this increasingly irritating," Brashen said. "You've said that," Harry said. "I will keep saying it until it stops being true." "That's your right," Harry agreed. He and Myra found their rhythm in the months after Tam's death, the way people find rhythms in the aftermath of grief, not by recovering and returning to what they were before, but by building something new that incorporated the loss without being defined by it. She was his closest confidant and his most useful critic and his most reliable source of the 12 things he hadn't thought of yet. She brought him meals when he forgot to eat, which happened more than he'd have predicted. He sat with her on the bad nights when the loss surfaced and the cold felt like her father's death and Tam's death all stacked on top of each other, and he didn't fix it, he just remained. There was something between them that neither of them named. It had the texture of importance and the shape of something not yet ready to be what it might eventually become. Harry, who had limited experience with this kind of thing and a Hogwarts career that had managed to produce a brief and somewhat chaotic relationship with Cho Chang, recognized the feeling from a distance and chose not to examine it too closely because there was always too much else to do, and because naming things before they were ready was how you lost them. Myra, for her part, demonstrated an exact and knowing awareness of everything Harry was not saying, and an equal precision in also not saying it, which was probably the most sophisticated thing Harry had ever encountered in another person, and which made him trust her more than almost anyone. The war itself, and it was a war now, had been won for months, was simply being called by a name that matched what it was, moved through phases that Brashen would have been able to chart more precisely than Harry. Harry experienced it less as phases than as a continuous tension, with periodic moments of either release or catastrophe. They didn't fight Jadis's forces head-on. Harry wouldn't allow it, not because he was afraid of the engagement, but because the math was wrong and the math had to change before the engagement. Every direct confrontation was measured against what it cost. Every engagement had to mean something beyond the engagement itself. What he built instead was friction. Constant, careful, targeted friction. The network disrupted supply lines. Jadis's castle needed feeding and supplying the same as any fortress, and her routes were known. The runners intercepted communications. The Red Dwarves, under Gret's direction, conducted a series of what Harry privately thought of as engineering operations, blocking passes, redirecting frozen streams, creating terrain problems that forced her wolf patrols to take longer routes and arrive more tired. Jadis adapted. She was not stupid, and she never made the same mistake twice, and Harry respected this the way you respect a problem that requires your full attention. He studied her responses the way he'd once studied the tournament tasks, looking for the pattern underneath the response, the assumption that drove the decision. What he found, over the months, was this: she responded to direct threat with concentrated, overwhelming force. But she responded to diffuse, distributed threat with something that looked like patience but functioned like paralysis. She couldn't concentrate force on something she couldn't locate. She couldn't overwhelm a network with no center point. The stone hall was a center point. Harry knew this. He moved the command function regularly, a week at the hall, 2 weeks at a secondary location, deliberate inconsistency. He kept the hall from being the kind of target she'd send everything at. "You think like someone who's been hunted," Myra said when he explained this to her. "I have been hunted," Harry said, "since I was 1 year old." He paused. "It teaches you things." The battle at the frozen river was the turning point, though Harry didn't know it was the turning point until it was over. 9 months in, deep into what would have been, in England, late autumn. The cold in Narnia had, impossibly, deepened further, as though Jadis was pressing harder in response to what she was dealing with, pouring more of herself into the winter as both weapon and expression. The ice on the river was 6 feet thick in places. The sky was the color of old pewter, all day, every day. Her plan was intelligent. Harry acknowledged this afterward without pleasure. She split her force into 3 groups, the largest moving through the central approach, the other 2 flanking east and west in a coordinated pincer that was timed to meet at the stone hall. She'd gotten better intelligence this time. Harry knew this because the timing was too precise to be guesswork. Someone in the network had talked, or had been in the wrong place, or had been watched more carefully than they'd known. He found out about the attack 6 hours before it arrived, barely, and only because Fenwick ran a scouting loop that night rather than resting, for reasons the wolf later described as it felt like a night for running, which was not a strategic assessment but which turned out to be correct. 6 hours. Harry looked at the options. He held them all in his mind at once: the terrain, the numbers, the approach routes, the forces he had available, and he made 3 decisions in the space of a minute. First, evacuate the non-combatants south through the streambed route. Oren to lead them, which was a waste of Oren's fighting capacity, but the correct choice because Oren was the only one who could keep a frightened group moving fast and quietly through the dark without losing anyone. Second, do not defend the stone hall. Abandon it, scatter. Draw all 3 groups into the valley where the terrain favored the defenders more than the approaches did. Third, Jadis's central group would expect the heaviest resistance at the hall. Instead, they would find nothing. The confusion of finding nothing, in a force expecting a target, was its own weapon. He explained this to Brashen in 4 minutes. Brashen looked at the map, looked at Harry and said, "If the flanking groups don't get confused in the valley terrain, they will," Harry said. "Night, unknown terrain and no central objective to orient on. They'll be feeling for us. We'll already know where they are." "If you're wrong, I know," Harry said. "Let's not be wrong." They weren't wrong. The central force entered the valley to find it empty. The time they spent searching, and Harry had counted on the fact that Jadis's forces, finding no target, would search rather than immediately withdraw, because an army doesn't easily admit it's been moved through rather than engaged, was the time the flanking groups spent stumbling in unfamiliar dark terrain with their coordination disrupted by the absence of a shared objective. Brashen hit the eastern flank from the ridge with everything he had. Harry hit the western flank personally with a strike force of 40, the most mobile fighters they had, the ones who knew the terrain. He moved through the dark with his Patronus stag close and his wand working constantly, and the months of this land's particular education in his hands and his feet and his judgment. He didn't fight clean. He fought the way a year of this had taught him to fight, fast and creative, and without attachment to the expected form of an engagement. The western flank broke in 90 minutes. The eastern flank held longer. Brashen was deliberate, thorough, unhurried. The methodical dismantling of an organized force by someone who had been waiting 63 years to do this properly. Harry arrived at the eastern approach just as the flank's command structure, what passed for one in Jadis's forces, collapsed, and the retreat began. The central force, finding the valley empty and suddenly hearing everything go wrong around them, withdrew. They won. Not finally, not decisively. Jadis still had her castle, still had her winter, still had capabilities they hadn't tested fully. But they'd met her in the field with coordinated force and sent her back, and that hadn't happened in 50 years, and the significance of it moved through the resistance network like the first warmth the land had felt in half a century. Brashen stood in the dawn, genuine dawn, the next morning, thin gray light on the snow, and looked at the retreating tracks of the central force disappearing toward the western approaches. His expression was not triumphant. It was something quieter and more durable. The look of someone whose conviction, held through 50 years of evidence against it, had just been briefly, partially, incompletely vindicated. He didn't say anything. Harry stood beside him and didn't say anything either. That was fine. Spring came 8 months later. Not full spring, not yet, not the total liberation, but something in the cold shifted, a hairline crack running through the certainty of the permanent winter, and one morning Harry woke to the sound of water moving under ice, which was a sound he hadn't heard since arriving, and he lay still in his alcove in the stone hall and listened to it with something that pressed against the inside of his chest from somewhere he hadn't expected. Myra told him what it meant. They were sitting on the hall's roof, a flat section at the western end where you could sit if you didn't mind the cold, and Harry had long since stopped minding cold, and she said, "When Aslan moves, the winter responds." "Even a little, he's doing something," Harry said. "He's always doing something," Myra said. "The question is whether we're doing enough that it matters." "Is that how it works? We have to—" "I don't think it's a transaction," she said. "I think it's more like resonance, two things moving in the same direction." Harry thought about that. The deeper magic. Maybe. She looked at the landscape. The snow was still total, nothing visible yet, no bare earth, no shoots. But the quality of light was fractionally different, imperceptibly different, unless you'd been looking at the same frozen world for 16 months and had the change of it stored in your body. "What are you going to do when it's over?" she said. "Really? I go back," Harry said. "If I can, and your war there." "Yes," he paused. "I've been thinking about that, about what I'll be going back to." He looked at his hands. "I've spent a year and a half being—" He searched for the word. "Someone," he said. "Someone specific. Not Harry Potter who survived and has a scar and is important because of what happened to him when he was one. Just me, whatever that is." "I could tell you what that is," Myra said. "Go on." She was quiet for a moment, not composing the answer. He could tell she already had it, was just deciding whether to give it. "Someone who walks into a room full of people who have given up and makes them remember that giving up was a choice," she said. "And not in a way that makes them feel stupid for having chosen it, in a way that makes them feel like they're allowed to choose differently." She paused. "That's actually very rare." Harry looked at the frozen landscape. "Hermione would put it less kindly," he said. "How would she put it?" "Probably, Harry, you have a completely irrational inability to believe you're going to lose, and by some miracle this keeps working." Myra almost smiled. "Both things can be true. Both things are definitely true," Harry said. The coronation was Brashen's idea, and Harry argued against it for 3 days. "It's symbolic," he said. "We haven't won yet, it's premature." "It is precisely because we haven't won yet that it matters," Brashen said, with the patience of someone who had been waiting for this argument and had already lived through it mentally. "A symbol is not a lie about the state of things. It is a commitment about the direction of them. It puts a target on. You are already a target. You have been a target since the frozen river. The witch knows your name, Harry. She knows it was not Brashen or Cain or Hesta who did this. She knows someone new came." He held Harry's gaze. "A king is a target, yes. A king is also something she has never had to fight before. An acknowledged king, with the loyalty of these people formalized and named, that is different from a commander. That changes what she is dealing with, and she knows what commanders are. She does not know what to do with a king." "I'm 15. You are 17, Brashen said, because it was true. 2 years had passed, or something like 2 years, and Harry had stopped tracking it precisely, but the math was right. "You are 17, and you have done things that men 3 times your age have not. I am not asking you to be something you aren't. I am asking you to let the people who follow you name what you already are to them." Harry was quiet. "They need this," Brashen said more quietly. Not for you, for themselves. The naming of it matters for them. Harry looked at the old general. The old general who had found his army again had been using it as it was meant to be used for a year and a half, and who was now standing in front of him with the composed certainty of someone who has assessed every side of a question and come to a conclusion. Fine, Harry said, but it's not. I'm not keeping it. When this is over and a proper order is restored, I'm not. When this is over, Brashen said, we will address what comes next. Today we address today. The ceremony was not elaborate. Harry had asked for that. He didn't want elaborate. Elaborate felt wrong for what this was. He wanted honest. They did it in the stone hall. The full council gathered plus as many others as the hall could hold. Gret had made space for more by the simple method of removing the interior wall between the map room and the main hall, which was structurally inadvisable, but which she declared definitively fine while looking at it with her arms crossed, which was sufficient authority. There was no crown. There was a circlet, Gret's work, iron and something blue-veined from the mountain that caught the firelight, and Brashen held it and spoke in the voice of a general recounting a campaign, simple and direct, what this person had done, what it had cost, what it had built, not inflated, not rhetorical, the facts of it which were sufficient. Harry sat in the center of the gathered people and listened to the facts of what he'd apparently done and felt them from the outside for the first time. From the inside, it had been a series of days. From the outside, as Brashen described it, it was something that had a shape. He thought about Hogwarts. About the Great Hall with its 4 long tables and floating candles. About the way the ceiling showed the sky. He thought about Ron and Hermione, and the fierce specific ache of missing them landed with a clarity it hadn't in months. About Dumbledore, who was probably somewhere in a complicated plan that Harry was supposed to be a piece of. About Voldemort, who was out there and real and waiting. He thought about the fact that he was going to have to go back and face all of it. He thought, good. Not good that it was hard, not good that people were in danger. Good that he would face it differently. Good that the thing in him that had always flinched away from his own importance, that had spent years believing the prophecy was something happening to him rather than something he was choosing, had been replaced quietly over 17 months in a frozen world with something that simply said, this is mine to do and I will do it. Brashen placed the circlet on his head. The hall made a sound, not a shout, something deeper, less performed. The sound of many people releasing something they'd been holding for a long time. Harry looked out at them, at Brashen, standing straight, something in his eyes that was enormously private. At Cain and Hesta side by side, as they'd been in that frozen streambed 8 months ago. At Dora in the back, with her bow slung over her shoulder and the expression of someone who had made up her mind about something irreversible. At Gret, who was not a demonstrative person and was currently demonstrating nothing, except that her arms were uncrossed for the first time Harry had ever seen, which was Gret's version of profound feeling. At Orin, enormous and warm and looking at Harry with those small, calm eyes that missed nothing and judged nothing. At Myra. She was looking at him the way she'd looked at him the night he'd sat with her after Tam died, the way she looked at things that mattered, with her whole attention and no self-protection. She held his gaze for a long moment. He held hers. Then she smiled, a real smile complete, the one she didn't issue under mild protest, and looked away. Harry looked back at the hall and felt himself, properly and entirely and for the first time, in the right place. He ruled for 3 years after that. 3 years of building what had begun. The alliance consolidated, the resistance formalized, the network became something closer to governance, rough and improvised and argument-prone, and entirely without the bureaucratic elegance that a proper kingdom probably required, but functional, genuinely functional. The communities under the alliance had food stores that lasted through the hard surges. The runner network had evolved into something with redundancy built in, so that losing one route didn't collapse the information system. The dwarf engineers, under Gret's direction, had made the stone hall into something permanent and added 2 annexes. The war with Jadis settled into a grinding strategic contest that Harry thought of, privately, as the long middle. She hadn't found a way to break the alliance. He hadn't found a way to break her hold on the winter. The frozen river battle stood as the high point of direct engagement, and he was honest about the fact that a second engagement of that scale, with those odds, was not a guarantee of the same result. He pushed instead at the edges of her power. He pushed constantly. Every disruption, every community liberated from direct patrol pressure, every month where the supply of creatures she was turning to stone declined, because fewer of them were being caught. He pushed at her winter too, in ways that Myra and he theorized about for months, the deeper magic, the resonance she'd mentioned. He didn't know how to use it directly, but he knew that it responded to something, acts of genuine selflessness, sacrificial choices, the opposite in every sense of what Jadis built herself on. He made those choices when he could, not performatively, not as magical transactions. He made them because they were right and trusted that the resonance would follow. The spring came a little further each year, not enough, not the total liberation, but the hairline crack in the permanent winter grew, slowly, into something you could see without looking for it. He thought about going home, not constantly, not in a way that made him less present to what was here, but the thought was there, running beneath everything else. Hermione and Ron Umbridge, who felt like a different world's problem but was still a problem. Voldemort, who was the war he'd been born into and who was still out there, still moving, still building. The corridor in his dreams that led to the door. He wrote to them sometimes, which was irrational because there was no postal service between worlds and the letters went nowhere, but which he did anyway. He told them about the Stone Hall and Brashen and Myra and Orin. He told them about the things he'd learned. He told Ron he was sorry for whatever panic had been involved. He told Hermione he was working on it. He folded the letters and put them in the iron box Gret had made him at the start of the second year, when she'd noticed, in her blunt observant way, that he occasionally needed a place to put things. Aslan came on a night in what would have been his 20th year, if he were counting. He came to the eastern approach of the Stone Hall, where Harry often sat in the evenings. Harry heard him before he saw him, or felt him, the same way as the first time, that quality of presence like warmth in the air. He didn't stand, he waited. The lion came and sat, actually sat, settling onto his haunches in the snow with the ease of something that chose all its positions deliberately, and looked at Harry with those ancient golden eyes. "It's time," Harry said. Aslan said nothing. The lion didn't speak, not in words. He never had, not to Harry. But his silence had a quality of communication that Harry had learned to read over 3 years of occasional appearances, brief, always on nights that had a particular weight, always at moments that turned out later to be significant. This silence said, yes. Harry looked at the stone hall. The light from inside fell through the carved window slots in warm orange rectangles on the snow. He could hear faintly voices, Myra in the map room arguing with Dara about something. Brashen's measured response. The sound of Orin moving through the back corridor. He felt the tearing of it as a physical thing. "I have to go," he said, not to the lion specifically, to the fact of it. "There are people there, people who need." He stopped. He ran a hand through his hair. The circlet was inside. He didn't wear it constantly, which Brashen occasionally disapproved of. "What happens here when I go?" "The alliance holds." Aslan looked at him with an expression that Harry had learned to identify as, "You already know this, and you're asking it to delay the other thing." "I know," Harry said. "I know they can do this without me. I know that's the point." He looked at his hands. "I know." He sat with the fact of leaving in silence for a while. The lion sat with him and did not hurry. "She isn't broken yet," Harry said. "Jaddies, the winter isn't fully." The golden eyes held him. "You'll handle it," Harry said. He meant, when I'm gone, the thing I've been contributing to, the resonance that continues through the people and the choices and the direction of things. He meant, I trust you with what I built. The lion's breathing was slow and even in the cold. Harry sat with the leaving for a long time. Then he said, and the saying of it was the hardest thing he'd done in 3 years, "I'm not ready." The lion looked at him. I know it's not about ready," Harry said. "I know." He looked at the door of the stone hall. "Can I tell them? Can I have a night to?" The golden eyes moved, toward the hall, back to Harry. "You have until morning." Harry nodded. He put his hands on his knees and pushed himself to standing. He looked at the lion one more time. The enormous, impossible, terrible, and wonderful face of a thing that moved through the world on its own terms, and asked nothing of him except what he was already. "Thank you," Harry said. He didn't entirely know what he was thanking for. Everything seemed like the right scope. The lion held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then Harry went inside to tell the people he had spent 3 years of his life alongside that he was leaving in the morning, and he did not waste any of those 3 seconds trying to hold them past their length. Chapter 5. The same corridor the night went the way knights go when they have to carry more than knights are built for. Harry told Brashen first. He found him in the map room, moving pins on the board with the methodical focus of someone who would still be doing this the same way in 20 years, and he said it plainly because plain was the only way Brashen would want it. Aslan came tonight. I'm leaving in the morning. Brashen looked at the board for a long moment without moving any more pins. Then he turned and he did something he had never done in 3 years. He crossed the room and put both hands on Harry's shoulders, the way a general might with a son, the way a man does when words are insufficient and the body has to carry the rest. He didn't say anything for a full 10 seconds. Then, "The alliance holds." "The alliance holds," Harry said. "Kane will lead the military council. Hesta takes the civilian governance. They'll argue. They always argue. They're better for it." Harry held the old centaur's gaze. You know what to do, you've known since before I got here. You just needed someone to say it was possible, Brashen said. Yes, another silence. Brashen's hands dropped from his shoulders. He turned back to the map board, and Harry understood that this was how the old general handled things that mattered, by returning to the work, because the work was the love made visible. The circlet, Brashen said, without turning. Stays here, Harry said. Obviously. Obviously, Brashen agreed, and his voice was entirely steady except for the one word, which was not. He told Myra last, not because she was least, the opposite. He told her last because it was the conversation he didn't know how to have and therefore needed the most time around the edges of it before he could walk into the center. She was in her alcove, still awake, sitting on her bedroll with her knees pulled up and a letter she'd been writing in her lap, to her mother, who was alive in a fawn community 2 days south and whom Myra visited every other month with the regularity of someone who had learned not to take people for granted. She looked up when he came to the door. She read his face. Whatever she read there made her set the letter down. Aslan, she said. Yes, she was quiet. She looked at her hands. When? Morning, she nodded. The kind of nod that isn't agreement, just acknowledgement, the body doing the only neutral thing it has available when it needs a moment. Harry came and sat against the wall beside her alcove. Not on it, beside it, on the stone floor, which was cold, which he didn't notice. The work continues, he said. I know it continues, she said. I'm not, she stopped, tried again. I'm not worried about the work. He looked at her. She was looking at the wall across from her, at the particular middle distance that people look at when they're managing something with their face. Myra, don't, she said, not unkindly. Don't explain it to me, I know it. I've known since the beginning that this was. She turned to look at him, and what was on her face was real and unmanaged, and he'd seen her face in enough bad moments to understand the difference. I just need a minute with it. He gave her the minute. When it passed, she said, tell me what it's like. Your world, really tell me. Not the warm version you gave the Valley Council, the actual version. So he did. He started from the beginning, the cupboard under the stairs, which he hadn't told anyone here about, and the Dursleys, and what it meant to grow up unwanted and clueless and then suddenly central to a war you hadn't chosen. He told her about the sorting hat and the hat's uncertainty and the way he'd almost been a Slytherin, which made her look at him sharply and say, I believe it, in a tone that was somehow both criticism and compliment. He told her about the first time he'd flown on a broomstick. He told her about Ron's chess and Hermione's voice when she knew the answer and had been waiting for someone to ask. He told her about the Triwizard Tournament, really told her, not the cleaned-up version, the dragons and the lake and the maze and what was at the center of the maze. She didn't say anything when he got to the graveyard. She reached over and put her hand over his briefly and then removed it. He told her about the prophecy. She sat with it. It says you have to kill him, she said. Or be killed, Harry said. Yes, one of us ends the other, and you're going back to that. I was always going to go back to that, Harry said. That's why I was sent here first, I think. So I'd go back as, he paused, so I'd go back as someone who could actually do it. Myra looked at him for a long time, then she said, you're not afraid of him. It wasn't quite a question. I'm not afraid of much anymore, Harry said, and it wasn't a boast, it was just true, stated plainly. Jaddy's helped with that, actually. After you've dealt with a being of that kind of power, everything recalibrates. He paused. I'm not reckless. I know what he can do. But afraid, he shook his head. Fear was always his best weapon against me. I don't think it'll work the same way now. She studied him. No, she said. I don't think it will either. They sat together until the sky outside began to shift from black to the dark blue that preceded Narnia's grudging gray dawn. Neither of them slept. It wasn't a sad vigil. It was the vigil of two people who had run out of time and were choosing to be awake for the end of it rather than unconscious. At some point, Myra said, the two friends of yours, they're going to be very confused. Completely, Harry said. And this Umbridge. Yes, she has no idea, Myra said, with a satisfaction that was entirely hers and entirely sharp-edged, what is about to come back through that cabinet. Harry almost laughed. It surprised him, the laugh, genuine and sudden, and for a moment everything was just that, the genuine, surprised laugh of someone who loves the person who made them do it. Myra heard it. She looked at him. The thing neither of them had named was right there on the surface of the moment, fully visible, fully acknowledged in silence. He held her gaze for 3 long seconds, then she stood up. Come on, she said. I'll walk you to where the door appears. He stood up too. He took one look around her alcove, the letter, the practical disorder of her living space, the carved wooden piece on her shelf that had been Tam's and that she'd kept. He looked at it for a moment. Myra. Yes, he stopped. He knew what he wanted to say. He also knew that saying it was either the beginning of something or the most painful kind of goodbye, and he couldn't tell which, and the dawn was arriving outside, and Aslan had said until morning. She looked at him with her whole face, the way she'd looked at him at his coronation, with no self-protection and full attention. "I know," she said softly. "I know, Harry." He nodded. He followed her out. The others were assembled at the stone hall's eastern approach. All of them, the full council and more. Word had moved through the hall, overnight the way words move in small communities, quickly and completely. Gret was there, arms crossed, face composed into its usual iron neutrality, but her eyes were doing the same thing they'd done at the coronation, betraying her. Dara stood with her bow, which she didn't need and had brought anyway, because Dara expressed everything important through being armed and ready. Cain and Hesta stood side by side as they always did now. Orin was there, enormous and still, and looked at Harry with those small, calm eyes that had looked at him the same way since the first night in the Hollow, and had never once required him to be anything other than what he was. Fenwick sat at the edge of the group. When Harry looked at him, the wolf raised his head and held Harry's gaze and then lowered it once, a bow, precise and dignified and entirely Fenwick's own. Harry stood in front of all of them. He had thought during the night about what to say. He had discarded several versions that sounded like speeches, which he didn't believe in giving. What he said in the end was, "You did this. Not me. I showed up and pointed at something that was already true. Everything that happened after that is yours." He paused. "Finish it." They didn't cheer. There was something better than a cheer, a silence that had weight and intention in it, the silence of people who have been told what they already know and are confirming it to themselves. Aslan was at the edge of the tree line. Harry walked toward the place where the lion waited, and the snow cracked under his feet, and the dark blue dawn light fell on everything, and he did not look back until he was almost at the trees. Then he did. He looked back. He took them all in, the stone hall, the orange light in its windows, the faces of people he had bled beside and argued with and sat in the dark with, and he held the picture of it in his mind with both hands, the way you hold something you know you won't be able to replace. Myra was standing slightly apart from the group. She raised her hand once. He raised his in return. He turned and walked into the trees, where Aslan stood, and where the dark between the trunks was doing something that dark normally didn't do, organizing itself into the shape of a door. The cabinet swallowed him whole. No falling this time, or not the same kind of falling. Something more like the world turning inside out around a point that was him, and then the inside out resolving back into rightness, and rightness being cold stone floor under his feet, dust in the air, the smell of cedar and old wood, and the narrow dark interior of a cabinet that hadn't moved. He pushed the doors open. The storage room, the broken furniture, the cracked mirror with his reflection split diagonally, the 3 crates. The cold that was Hogwarts in November cold, not Narnian forever cold, and even that distinction had a whole history in it now. He stood in the doorway of the cabinet for a moment, just breathing the particular smell of old castle and dust, and he let it land. He was back. Not years later, same night, same corridor outside, same darkness under the door. He knew it the same way he'd known the first Narnia morning, in his body, which was a different instrument than it had been. He stepped out. The mirror showed him his reflection. He looked at it. He looked different, not visibly older, not dramatically. He still looked 17, more or less, the age he'd grown into in Narnia. But the face looking back wasn't the face he remembered from Hogwarts bathrooms and the glass of dormitory windows. That slightly hunted, slightly braced expression that had lived on his features for so long he'd stopped registering it. The face in the mirror was just his face, still scarred, still bespectacled, though his glasses had been repaired by Myra a year in with a precision that Hermione would have approved of. Still him, but present in itself rather than prepared for the next thing coming at it. He ran a hand through his hair and went to find his dormitory. He'd expected to slip back into Hogwarts the way he'd left it, anonymously, quietly, a student returning from somewhere he shouldn't have been. What he'd underestimated was the effect of 3 years on the body's relationship with a space. The castle felt smaller. Not literally, the corridors were the same dimensions, the ceilings the same height, the staircases the same controlled chaos. But it felt smaller the way any contained space feels smaller when you've spent a significant amount of time in something without walls. He walked through the 4th floor corridor, and his feet knew the route, and the knowledge was so entirely automatic that he was barely navigating at all, just moving. He passed a painting, a sleeping knight who snored and stopped. He'd walked past this painting approximately 400 times. He'd never actually looked at it. He looked at it now. The knight had a specific face, a very particular way of sleeping, an expression of deep contentment that the painter had clearly thought carefully about. He moved on. The fat lady was asleep when he reached Gryffindor Tower. He said the password, it still worked, same night, of course it worked, and climbed through the portrait hole and stood in the common room, which had one person in it. Hermione was asleep in an armchair, with a book open across her lap, which was so exactly correct that it was almost funny. Her head was tilted back, and she was breathing the deep, even breath of someone who had been awake for a very long time and had finally lost the battle. There were 3 books on the table beside her. He looked at the spines. 2 were about magical transportation theory. 1 was about vanishing cabinets specifically. He'd been right. She'd gone to the library. He stood there for a moment, looking at one of the 2 best friends he'd had for 5 years, who had not seen him in, from his perspective, 3 years, and who had been in this room doing research about where he'd gone while he was doing it. She looked the same. She was 15, still the same 15 she'd been 3 hours ago from her perspective. The thought was briefly vertiginous, that he'd lived 3 years and she'd lived 3 hours. He set it aside because vertiginous wasn't useful right now. He picked up one of the books she wasn't using, sat in the armchair opposite her, and waited. She woke up 20 minutes later. She always woke up quickly, full alertness, no gradual return to consciousness, and her eyes went to his face with the trained panic of someone who'd been searching, and then to his presence in the chair, and she said his name like a shout that had been forced into a whisper. "Harry." "Hi," he said. She was on her feet, the book falling to the floor, and she crossed the room in 3 steps and grabbed his arms and looked at him, and he could see her doing what Hermione did, reading, cataloging, assessing at 17 steps per second. "You were gone for 4 hours, she said. "Where were you? Are you hurt? What happened to your—" She stopped. "Something is different." "Several things," he agreed. "Your face," she said. She was still holding his arms and she wasn't letting go yet, which was fine. "You look," she frowned. "You look like you, but something is, Harry. Where were you?" "I'll tell you everything," he said. "I promise, but maybe when Ron is awake, so I only have to tell it once." She searched his face for another moment. Then she took a breath, the kind that was reestablishing control after a fright, and released his arms and sat back down. "I'll go get him," she said. "He'll be asleep." "He'll be fine," Hermione said firmly and went upstairs. Harry sat in the common room and looked at the fireplace, where the embers were still orange and warm. The Gryffindor common room, with its red and gold everything and its squashy armchairs and its window that showed the grounds going dark and cold under the November sky. He looked at it the way he'd looked at the stone hall when he was leaving, deliberately, with attention, putting it in a place where it wouldn't get lost. He was home. He knew that. But he also understood now that home was larger than he'd thought, not a single location, but a set of rooms the heart built, and he had more of them now than he'd arrived with. Ron came downstairs in 3 minutes, which was faster than Harry had expected, in his pajamas, his hair doing things that shouldn't have been physically possible, and his face cycling through an expression sequence that Harry wished he could have documented. Confusion, recognition, relief, joy, confusion again, and then landing on something that was simply there. "You are in its most complete form." "Mate," Ron said. "Hi," Harry said again. Ron crossed the room and hit Harry on the shoulder hard enough to demonstrate that he'd been genuinely worried without requiring them to discuss the fact. Harry hit him back. They did this briefly, and the whole exchange was entirely sufficient. 4 hours, Ron said. "You were gone 4 hours. Were you worried?" "I told everyone you were fine," Ron said, which was a complete non-answer that answered everything. "I know. I was, yes, obviously." Ron sat on the floor in front of the fireplace, which was his particular way of settling in for something important. "What happened?" Harry told them. He told them everything: the cabinet, the cold and the stars, Fenwick and Brashen and Myra, the runner network in the ridge camp in the valley, the battles, the long middle of the war, the coronation, the 3 years. He told it straight through, without performance, the same way he'd told Myra about Hogwarts, the actual version. He held nothing back. Ron didn't interrupt, which was both unusual and a sign that something in Harry's voice or face had communicated this is the kind of thing you hear through. Hermione took quiet notes with a quick quotes quill set to minimum speed, which he recognized as her way of processing rather than recording. When he finished, it was 2 in the morning. The fire had gone down to coals. Ron was looking at him with an expression of complicated wonder. "You were a king," he said. "Yes." Harry Potter was an actual king. For 3 years, yes. Ron turned to Hermione. "He was a king. I heard him," Hermione said. She was looking at Harry with an expression he recognized less easily, something that was working through several things at once. "The circlet," she said. "You left it there. It belonged there. And the people, Brashen and Myra." She said Myra's name with a very specific slight pause that told Harry exactly how thoroughly she had been listening. "They're still fighting." "Yes, but they'll win." He said it the way Brashen had said the alliance holds, simply as the fact it was. The spring was coming. Aslan was moving, they'll win. Hermione sat with this for a moment. You've changed, she said. Yes. Not in a bad way, she clarified, and then looked slightly irritated with herself for the clarification, as though needing to make it was an inaccuracy she hadn't intended. Actually, you seem more yourself than before, that's the strange part. That's not strange, Harry said. I just had time to figure out who that was. Ron picked up one of the Vanishing Cabinet books from Hermione's research pile and turned it over in his hands. He set it down. He looked at Harry. So what now? He said. Harry thought about Umbridge, about the educational decrees posted in the corridors, about Dumbledore who wouldn't look at him, about the DA which existed because there was a threat that wasn't being acknowledged, and about Voldemort who was real and building and waiting for the right moment. Now, he said, we get back to work. He slept 4 hours and woke before the dormitory. Old habit, in Narnia he'd woken before everyone because the early hours were often the most information-rich, because Fenwick ran his pre-dawn loops and came back with reports, because the camp operated best when he was already awake and thinking before the day's demands arrived. He lay in his Hogwarts bed in the dark and listened to the breathing of his dormitory, Ron, Neville, Seamus, Dean, and felt the particular safety of it. These specific people in these specific beds, alive and unknown. He got up and dressed and went down to the common room and sat with Hermione's research books until dawn proper. At breakfast, everything was the same as it always was. The great hall, the ceiling showing a gray November morning, the 4 tables, the floating candles. Same students, same noise level, same smell of toast and pumpkin juice. Harry sat between Ron and Hermione and looked at the ceiling and felt what he'd told Myra he'd tell her about, the warmth of it. He described it correctly. It was right, the description. The ceiling showed the outside sky and somehow made it feel like comfort rather than exposure. Ron was putting extraordinary amounts of food on his plate. Hermione was reading. Harry drank his tea and looked around the great hall with the attention of someone seeing a place clearly for the first time in a long time. He noticed things. The way the first years sat slightly too close together at the Gryffindor end, the warmth-seeking behavior of young people in an overwhelming institution. The way certain 7th years had the specific posture of people counting down to something. The way Neville held his wand hand differently since the start of DA meetings, more deliberately, with more claim. Good, that was real progress. He noticed Umbridge. She was at the staff table, pink and precise, cutting her toast with the particular determination of someone who found the correct division of toast into triangles to be morally significant. She hadn't seen him. He watched her for a moment, the neat, small, absolute certainty of her, the way she occupied her space with the authority of someone who has never had to doubt whether they belonged in it. He thought, she doesn't know. She had spent the last 3 months making his life smaller. Narrowing it, constraining it, trying to make him feel that the walls of her authority were the actual walls of the world. She had no idea that the 15-year-old she'd kept in detention last night had spent 3 years in a frozen kingdom, fighting a being of genuine darkness and power, and building something from nothing and being crowned in a hall of stone by a general who'd been waiting 50 years to crown someone. She thought she was dealing with a schoolboy. He drank his tea. The confrontation came at 11. He hadn't planned it for 11 specifically. He hadn't planned it at all, in the sense of construction. What he'd planned was simply, no more of this particular thing. The version of himself that would have endured Umbridge's detentions indefinitely, writing the same sentence into his own skin, doing it because the authority of the institution felt total and permanent. That version had been replaced by someone who had built an institution from the ground up, and understood exactly what institutional authority was made of and what it wasn't. It wasn't natural law. It was a set of agreements that persisted as long as people agreed to persist them. He was in the corridor after Charms, walking back toward the main staircase when he heard her voice, that particular honey-coated administrative tone, directed at a first-year girl who had apparently committed the offense of running in the corridor, and the girl was frozen with her back against the wall and her chin was trembling. Harry stopped. He watched Umbridge finish the reprimand. Watched the first year nearly disappear into herself. Watched Umbridge turn away with the satisfaction of someone who has correctly processed a minor administrative matter. She turned and saw him. "Mr. Potter," she said, "you have a detention this evening. 7 o'clock. No," Harry said. The word landed in the corridor with a clarity that surprised even him, not in its intent, which he'd arrived at quietly over the last 8 hours, but in how simple it sounded. Just the word, just the thing that was true. Umbridge blinked. The expression on her face was the expression of someone whose equipment has returned an error it doesn't have a category for. "I beg your pardon," I won't be attending the detention, Harry said. He said it the same way he'd said you're going back to the wolf in the defile, without anger, without performance, simply as information being delivered to someone who needed it. The detentions you've been running are illegal. The quill you've been using constitutes prohibited punishment under the International Statute of Educational Conduct, Section 42, which Hermione can cite more precisely than I can if you'd like the subsection. He paused. I'm aware that you have a position of authority in this institution, and I'm aware that what I'm saying is a challenge to that authority. I'm making it anyway, clearly, so there's no misunderstanding. Umbridge had gone very still. The honey had gone out of her voice entirely, and what was left was the wire underneath. You are a student at this school. Yes, Harry said. And you are a ministry official who was installed in this school to suppress information about Voldemort's return, which happened. He's back, you know he's back. Fudge knows he's back, and you're currently running this school's defense education in a way that will get students killed if there's a conflict. He said it without raising his voice, which was probably more unsettling than raising it would have been. I am going to keep running the defense study group. I am not going to attend your detentions. I am not going to perform compliance with policies designed to keep students ignorant and afraid. She stared at him. The first-year girl, still against the wall, was staring too. Harry looked at Umbridge, really looked, the way he'd looked at the Wolf Patrol patterns, the way he'd looked at Jaddy's strategic responses. He looked for the crack Brashen had said didn't exist in Jaddy's and that he'd insisted was always there underneath. It was there, in the way she was holding herself. She was afraid, not of him specifically, of the thing he represented. Disorder, the loss of the arrangement she'd built, the exposure of everything that arrangement was designed to protect. He had no interest in cruelty. But he had spent 3 years watching genuine evil run a land into starvation and petrification, and he had then come back to this corridor and this castle, and he was not going to pretend that Dolor's Umbridge and her decorative cat plates were the immovable center of the world. 7 o'clock, she said, very quietly. Dangerous quiet. The quiet of someone reaching for their biggest available lever. I'll be in the common room, Harry said pleasantly. If you'd like to bring this to Dumbledore, I'm happy to have the conversation there. He walked away. The first-year girl was looking at him with enormous eyes. It's all right, he said to her in passing. She's not as big as she looks. The fallout was immediate and not exactly what he'd expected. He'd expected Umbridge to go to Dumbledore directly. What she did instead, and this was, Harry realized afterward, more intelligent than a direct complaint, because a direct complaint would require her to describe the conversation in full, was to post a new educational decree by afternoon. Decree number 30-something, students found in organized study groups without staff sanction were subject to immediate suspension pending ministry review. Ron read it at dinner and said, she's escalating. Yes, Harry said. What do we do? Harry looked at the decree posted on the notice board. Then he looked at the staff table, where Umbridge was eating with the contained satisfaction of someone who has just moved a piece on a board. Then he looked at the other end of the staff table, where Dumbledore was reading something with the expression of a man engaged with a text while actually attending to everything in the room at once. Their eyes met. Harry held Dumbledore's gaze. For a long time, or what felt like a long time in the length of a look, Dumbledore looked at him. Something moved behind those blue eyes, not surprise exactly, something more like the recognition of someone who has been reading a map and suddenly suspects the map is wrong. Harry looked away first. Not because he felt outmatched, he simply had nothing to prove to the man tonight and nowhere to spend the energy of a dominance contest. We move the DA meeting location, he said to Ron, and we tell Neville to pass the word. Anyone who's in is in. Anyone who's not is out. No pressure either way, but we're not hiding it anymore. Ron looked at him. Not hiding it. Number, Umbridge will. I know, Harry said. That's fine. Hermione, on his other side, had been quiet through most of the day, the quiet of someone doing a great deal of rapid internal reorganization. She said now, without looking up from her dinner, you're going to make her come at you directly. Yes. So that when she does, it's in the open. So that when she does, everyone can see what she actually is. He paused. She's been winning by making the cost of opposition personal and invisible. The quill, the detentions, it's small and private and you endure it alone. Make it public and she loses the private. Hermione set down her fork. She looked at him. 3 years, she said quietly. 3 years, he confirmed. You're completely different. I'm completely the same, Harry said. I just finished building. She looked at him for another moment with the expression she made when she was integrating something into a worldview that was already well built, but occasionally needed new rooms added. Then she picked her fork back up. "The decree," she said. "I want to check the procedural standing before we move the meeting. There may be a grounds of legitimacy argument that's worth having first." "Please," Harry said. "I'll have it by tomorrow morning." "I know you will," Harry said. Ron, on his left, was grinning the particular grin he grinned when he understood that something good was happening even if all the details weren't clear yet. "So we're taking her on," he said. "We're not hiding from her," Harry said. "There's a difference. But also yes. Ron's grin widened. "Brilliant," he said and went back to his food. Harry walked the grounds that evening, not for a reason or not a strategic one. He walked because he needed to feel the castle under his feet, the specific geography of Hogwarts in November dark, the cold Scottish air that was so different from Narnian cold and so familiar in its difference. He walked past the greenhouses, where the light inside showed herbology plants growing in their heated quiet. He walked the edge of the forbidden forest, not going in, just along the tree line, the way he'd walked Narnia's tree lines for 3 years and learned to read the dark. He stopped at the edge of the Black Lake. The water was almost perfectly still. The giant squid moved somewhere below the surface, visible as a disturbance rather than a shape, and the reflected lights of the castle windows broke and reformed on the surface. He thought about Aslan. He thought about those golden eyes and what they'd said that couldn't be said in words. He thought about the feeling of standing in a frozen valley looking at a creature that was both enormous and intimate, that was wild in the most essential sense of wild, not dangerous exactly, or not only dangerous, but ungovernable, uncontainable, belonging to itself entirely. He thought about the fact that the lion had said, "It's time," and that Harry had said, "I'm not ready," and that the lion had waited. He'd thought about that exchange more in the last 24 hours than in the months leading up to it. What it meant that Aslan had waited, had given him the night, the choice of how to spend it, the agency of the leaving, that hadn't been nothing. That had been something very specific, a power that could have said now, and meant now choosing instead to let him have the end of it on his own terms. He'd met that quality in Narnia before, in Brashen's patience, in Oren's steady watchfulness, in Fenwick's 3-beat warning howl that gave you the chance to respond rather than just reacting. He'd built a kingdom around it. The wind moved off the lake, cold and clean, carrying the smell of water and deep stone, and Harry stood at the edge of it with his hands in his pockets and the wrong stars replaced by right ones overhead, and let himself be exactly where he was. Somewhere in the castle, Umbridge was drafting her response. Somewhere in the ministry, Fudge was maintaining his position. Somewhere outside Britain, Voldemort was building his army. And somewhere in a frozen land under a cracking winter, Brashen was moving pins on a board and Myra was walking the eastern approach in the early dark, and the spring was coming slowly, the way springs come when enough people have insisted long enough that winter's end. Harry looked at the castle. All those lit windows, all those lives running behind them. He breathed in, he breathed out. The cold moved through him plainly, no resistance. He turned and walked back toward the light. Chapter 6, The Wind That Knows, Dumbledore asked on a Thursday. Not immediately. Harry had been back 4 days, which had been 4 days of Umbridge escalating through channels that Hermione dissected with the precision of a surgeon, and the fury of someone who had been told she was wrong about something she wasn't wrong about. 4 days of DA meetings in a new location, the 7th floor room that appeared when you needed it, which Harry had found by simply walking past the right wall and thinking, I need somewhere to teach, because after 3 years of building things in frozen landscapes, he'd stopped being precious about how resources were acquired. 4 days of the castle watching him differently without quite being able to articulate why. The students noticed first, not in a dramatic way, just in the way that attention in an enclosed community is always finely calibrated to power, and the calibration had shifted. People stood differently when he walked into a room. The kind of space that opened in a corridor was slightly different from the space that had opened a week ago, less there's Harry Potter who survived Voldemort, and more something that didn't have an obvious name but felt earned rather than inherited. Umbridge noticed too. She watched him at meals with the careful attention of someone who is revising their assessment of a threat, and he could see her revising, could see it in the small adjustments of her posture and the precision of her public pleasantness, which increased in direct proportion to how rattled she was, because Umbridge's pleasantness was armor rather than personality. She hadn't moved directly on the DA yet. Hermione's procedural argument had bought them 3 days of legal ambiguity. She'd found a clause in the Educational Governance Charter that required any suspension decree to cite specific violations rather than preemptive prohibitions, and had drafted a 12-paragraph letter to that effect which Harry had signed, and which was currently sitting in Umbridge's office, making her furious in a way she couldn't act on without revealing the weakness in her own decree. "She'll close the gap," Hermione said on the third morning. "I know," Harry said. "Give me time to work with." 2 days, Hermione said. "Maybe 3. That was when Dumbledore asked. The note arrived at breakfast on Thursday, carried by a school owl that landed with the particular authority of something that had been sent by someone who expected notes to be received. It said in Dumbledore's looping script, "Harry, if you're available this evening after dinner, I would appreciate a conversation. My office, 7 o'clock. There is no obligation." And then underneath, there is lemon sherbet. Ron looked at the note over Harry's shoulder. He said there's no obligation. "He's being careful," Harry said. "He never used to be careful with you," Ron said. Then, considering it, "I mean, he was always careful, but not careful. He doesn't know what he's dealing with yet," Harry said. "He's being polite until he does." Hermione took the note, read it, handed it back. "Are you going?" "Yes," Harry said. "Obviously. Don't let him," she stopped. "What?" She chose her words. "Don't let him put you back in the game board," she said. "The way he was using you before." Harry looked at her. "He's not going to," he said simply. Not a reassurance, a statement of architectural fact, the way Gret declared a wall structurally sound. Hermione held his gaze for a moment, then nodded, the way she nodded when she genuinely heard something rather than just registered it. Dumbledore's office was the same. Perches of sleeping magical instruments, portraits of previous headmasters, the particular quality of light that old rooms get when they've held a lot of significance, and the significance has had time to settle into the walls. Fawkes was on his perch, watching Harry with eyes that were entirely different from the flat intelligence of Jadis's wolves, warm, old, and knowing in the way of creatures that had seen many cycles of things. Harry sat down without waiting to be invited, which was new. Dumbledore noticed. He said nothing about it, settled into his own chair with the ease of someone who had decided to let the conversation find its shape organically. He looked at Harry with those blue eyes, which were currently doing the thing Harry had always found most unnerving about Dumbledore and now found simply interesting, looking through the presented surface of a thing toward whatever was behind it. "You're different," Dumbledore said. "People keep saying that. I imagine they do." Dumbledore picked up a lemon sherbet from the dish on his desk, considered it, set it down. A fidgeting gesture from a man who almost never fidgeted. "4 days ago you sat in Umbridge's detention and wrote lines into your own skin. Last night you ran a defense training session for 32 students in a room that you found by a method I cannot entirely account for, and when Argus Filch came to investigate the noise, you apparently told him very politely by his account, which is the detail I find most striking, that he was welcome to report you directly to the headmistress and that you'd be finished by 9 o'clock. I was finished by 8:50, Harry said. "Indeed." Dumbledore looked at him. "Something happened." "Yes." "Will you tell me?" Harry leaned back in the chair. He was thinking about Brashen's question from the first morning, "Are you doing this intentionally?" He'd said no, and that had been honest. This was different. This was a choice about what to offer and what to keep and why. "I found a vanishing cabinet," he said, "on the night of the detention. It took me somewhere it wasn't supposed to go." "Where?" "Another world," Harry said. "A world called Narnia. It had been in a long winter, a dark period under a being called the White Witch." He paused. "I was there for approximately 3 years. The silence was absolute. Every sleeping instrument in the office seemed to be holding its mechanical breath." Dumbledore looked at him. Really looked, all the analytical architecture behind those eyes running at full capacity, reading what Harry was and comparing it to what Harry had been and finding a gap too large to bridge by assumption. 3 years, Dumbledore said. "Here it was one night, same moment, the same corridor, but there 3 years. And you," Dumbledore stopped himself, restarted with more precision. "What did you do there?" "I built a resistance," Harry said, "and eventually fought a war, and ruled briefly." He said it without drama because there was no reason to be dramatic about facts. "I was crowned king about 18 months in. I abdicated when I came back, or the equivalent of it. I left the circlet there." Dumbledore sat with this for a long moment. The portraits on the walls were waking. Harry could see it in the corners of his vision, the gradual attentiveness of painted figures catching up to a conversation that was outside their ordinary scope. "You were crowned king," Dumbledore said. "Yes, at 16, 17 by that point. By the reckoning of a world that operated on a separate timeline from our own," Dumbledore said, with the precision of a man who was processing very fast and defaulting to technical specification when the larger shape of the thing was too large to address directly. "Yes," Harry said. Another silence. "The Vanishing Cabinet," Dumbledore said. I know the one. It's been in that room it's been there for a very long time. There's a corresponding cabinet at Borgin and Burke's, but the connection between them has been degraded for decades. What you're describing, a destination other than Borgin and Burke's, would require a corruption of the pairing, which could theoretically be caused by— I don't think it was a corruption, Harry said. Dumbledore paused. No. I think it took me where it was supposed to take me. He met Dumbledore's eyes. I'd been thinking about it. The cabinet was in a room that appears when people need things. I needed— He paused. Not because he wasn't sure of the answer, but because the answer had weight. I needed to become myself before I could do what I'm supposed to do here. I think the room knew that, and the cabinet took me somewhere that would make that happen. Dumbledore was very still. That is either the most extraordinary magical intuition I have heard in 60 years, he said, very quietly, or a rationalization of something painful into something that feels meaningful. Both things can be true, Harry said, and heard Myra's voice saying it. Dumbledore looked at him. You've changed your relationship with the prophecy, Dumbledore said. I haven't changed it. I've owned it. Harry looked at the old man directly. You've been treating me like a variable in a calculation. Not cruelly. I don't think you were doing it cruelly. I think you were doing it because you love this school and these people, and you've been running a very long game against Voldemort, and I was an important piece. He paused. I'm still an important piece, but I'm not only that, and I'm not going to behave as though I am anymore. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time without speaking. When did you become so articulate about this? He said finally. About 18 months in, Harry said. There was a general, his name was Brashen. He asked me if I was doing something intentionally. The answer was no, but it made me think about what I was doing and why, and after that I started being able to name it. He paused. He was very irritating about it. I think that helped. Something crossed Dumbledore's face, not a smile or not quite, but the ancestor of one. He sounds formidable. He's the best person I've ever watched operate in a crisis, Harry said. After my mum, I think. Based on what you've told me about her, Dumbledore absorbed this. Then quietly, you've been thinking about your parents. I think about them differently now, Harry said. Less like, he searched for it, less like a wound. More like an inheritance, like they gave me something specific and I've been figuring out what it is. He looked at his hands. My mum gave me the thing that made Voldemort's curse fail. It wasn't luck. It wasn't just love in the abstract. She was someone specific who made a specific choice, and the specificity of it is what had power. The generality of sacrifice doesn't work. It has to be a person making a choice. Yes, Dumbledore said, and then in a different register, yes. That is exactly right. I think that's what I'm supposed to understand before the end, Harry said, not the mechanics of the prophecy. Not the Horcruxes, we'll talk about those, I know we need to, I've been thinking about what you said last year. But underneath all of that, the thing that wins is someone specific making a specific choice. Not the chosen one, not the boy who lived, me, choosing. Dumbledore was very quiet. Outside the window, the November dark had settled fully onto the grounds, and the lake was invisible and the forest was just its own darkness against the greater darkness, and the castle sat in the middle of it, warm and specific and real. I have made errors, Dumbledore said. His voice was measured. In how I've handled you. In the distance I've kept this year, partly to protect you from Voldemort's access to your mind, but partly, I think, because you were becoming something I hadn't fully anticipated and I wasn't certain how to adjust. He looked at Harry. That is an apology. I know, Harry said. I accept it. Just like that. You're not the only person who's made errors, Harry said, and I've had 3 years to be frustrated with you and arrive at a place past the frustration. He paused. Also, Brashen was worse than you about the chess player thing, and I worked through it with him, so. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment that had a particular quality, the quality of someone genuinely surprised, which was something Harry suspected didn't happen to Dumbledore often. Then he laughed, quietly, genuinely, the laugh of someone who has been given an unexpected gift and recognizes it as such. Tell me about Narnia, he said. All of it, if you're willing. I want to understand what you went through, Harry told him. Not the same version as Ron and Hermione, longer, with more tactical detail, because Dumbledore would want the tactical detail and Harry had 3 years of it and there was, he'd realized, genuine value in having it recorded by the most formidable magical mind in Britain. He talked for an hour and a half. Dumbledore listened without interrupting. Umbridge moved on the DA on Friday. She'd closed the gap in the decree. Hermione had seen it coming, had done everything she could to slow it, had bought the 3 days she'd promised. The new decree was tighter. Any unauthorized student gathering of more than 4 persons for the purposes of magical instruction was grounds for immediate expulsion, effective immediately. She came to the room of requirement herself. She brought Filch and two sixth-year Slytherins who had been functioning as her informal informants since September. The DA was in session. Harry had known she was coming, not by any specific intelligence, but by the same instinct that had woken him before the frozen river battle, the deep reading of a tactical situation that had reached its natural escalation point. He told the group 10 minutes earlier, calmly, that if anyone wanted to leave before things got complicated, the door was right there and no one would think less of them. 4 people left. The other 28 stayed. Umbridge opened the door to a room full of students in the middle of practicing shield charms, all of them executing them with a level of competence that was approximately 3 years ahead of where the official Hogwarts defense curriculum had them. This was visually striking. Harry had counted on it being visually striking. This meeting, Umbridge said, is in direct violation of educational decree. 47, Hermione said from the second row without looking up from her stance. Yes, we've read it. Umbridge looked at Harry. Harry was standing at the front of the room. He hadn't moved when the door opened, hadn't turned toward it with the instinctive flinch of someone caught doing something they feel guilty about. He just continued watching Neville's shield charm form, which had been improving dramatically over the last month and was tonight almost perfect. Good Neville, he said. Then he turned to Umbridge. Mr. Potter, she said, and her voice had the quality of something pulled very tight. You are in violation. I'm teaching defensive magic to students at a school that is currently providing no meaningful defensive magical education, Harry said, in a year when a confirmed dark wizard who has previously attempted to kill most of the people in this room is active and rebuilding. He paused. Those things are both true at the same time. You are a student who taught 32 people shield charms, disarming spells, patronus charms, and a range of defensive jinxes over the last 3 months, Harry said. At an average competence level, that is significantly above the official 5th-year standard. I'd show you the results, but you've made it clear rather they couldn't defend themselves. Someone in the DA made a sound that was halfway between a cough and a laugh. Umbridge was very pink. You will accompany me to my office. No, Harry said. The room went completely still. Umbridge stared at him. This was the second time he'd said that word to her in a week, and the second time it had landed in the air between them like a stone into water, the ripples moving outward, touching every person in the room. You will, she started. Take me to Dumbledore, Harry said. If you want to have this conversation officially, have it there, with witnesses. Everything in the open. He looked at her with complete calm, the calm of someone who has stood in a frozen defile in the dark and waited for an army to come to him. I'll wait. Umbridge looked at the room full of students. She looked at Filch, who was offering nothing useful. She looked at the 2 6th-year Slytherins, who were looking at Harry with the expression of people recalibrating something they thought they'd understood. She left. The room was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then Neville said, "Are we in trouble?" "Yes," Harry said, "but the right kind." He looked around at the 28 people who had stayed. "Good shield charms tonight, I mean it. Next week we're doing non-verbal casting, which is harder and will require everyone to actually practice between sessions rather than arriving cold and hoping for the best." He paused. Same time, same place. Dumbledore handled the formal confrontation that evening. Harry wasn't present for the full conversation between Dumbledore and Umbridge. He was in the corridor outside the headmaster's office, sitting on a stone bench with Ron and Hermione, waiting, but he heard enough of the tonal quality of it through the door to understand what was happening. Dumbledore was using his authority, the way a chess grandmaster uses a piece he's been protecting for the whole game, precisely, at the correct moment, with the total confidence of someone who has been waiting for the board to reach exactly this configuration. Umbridge left the office 22 minutes later. Her walk was the walk of someone who has been very thoroughly contained without being given anything they could legally protest. She didn't look at Harry as she passed. He didn't call after her. Dumbledore opened the office door. "You can come in," he said. "All 3 of you." Ron stood up with the expression of someone bracing for information. Hermione had her notes out before the door was fully open. Harry walked in and sat down and looked at Dumbledore. "She's contained for now," Dumbledore said. "The decree has a procedural problem that Hermione was right to identify. I've sent a formal query to the Ministry's Educational Governance Office citing the Charter Clause, which will require a formal response before the decree can be enforced. That buys us time," Harry said. "Time," Dumbledore confirmed. He looked at Harry. "This isn't finished." "No," Harry said, "but it's changed." He paused. "She's been winning by making the cost of opposition feel permanent and private. It's not permanent. And it's definitely not private anymore." Dumbledore looked at him with the expression he'd been wearing since Thursday evening, the expression of a man who has been running a very long calculation and has just discovered that one of his variables is a constant he hadn't accounted for. "No," Dumbledore said, "it's not." The weeks that followed were full. The DA grew. 28 became 34, became 41. Hermione's procedural argument held Umbridge's decree in bureaucratic limbo for 3 weeks. She was clearly furious about this, and equally clearly unable to resolve it without escalating to a level of ministry involvement that would draw attention to the nature of her decree and why she'd written it, which she didn't want. Harry watched her manage this constraint with the professional appreciation of someone who had spent 3 years watching Jaddies manage the equivalent, the moment when the resistance becomes large enough that suppressing it costs more than containing it. He kept the DA focused, not just on spells, on thinking. On the questions that mattered. Why does this work, not just how? When do you escalate force and when do you de-escalate? What does it mean to protect someone as opposed to fighting someone? He taught the way he'd led in Narnia, by working through problems aloud, by asking people what they noticed, by creating the conditions for capability to develop rather than just transferring information. Neville's shield charm became genuinely exceptional. Luna Lovegood, who had joined in the 4th week with the serene certainty of someone who had expected to be there and simply waited until the correct moment, turned out to have an instinctive grasp of non-verbal casting that made Hermione narrow her eyes and review her notes. Ginny Weasley was the best duelist Harry had trained since Dara, actually, in a way that was strikingly similar. The same combination of aggression and precision, the same quality of thinking 3 movements ahead while executing the one in front of her. Ron, who was frequently underestimated by everyone including himself, turned out to be exactly what Harry had said to Dumbledore. Someone who played chess with his whole self, aggressively, sacrificially, with an imagination for spatial arrangement that translated into defensive positioning in a way that Harry spent one evening staring at, watching Ron instinctively coordinate the positions of 4 other students in a practice drill, and thinking, there it is, there's what he actually is. He told Ron afterward. Ron looked uncomfortable. You were coordinating 4 people simultaneously without thinking about it, Harry said. Do you know how rare that is? I just play chess, yes, Harry said, which is coordination, which is what you're doing. I need you thinking about other people's positions in every drill from now on. He paused. You're not just a fighter, Ron, you're a coordinator. He thought about Brashen. That's actually more valuable. Ron stared at him. Hermione already knows she's brilliant, Harry said. You're going to be just as important when things go wrong. I need you to know that before they do. Ron was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the floor with the expression of someone receiving something they needed and weren't sure how to carry yet. All right, he said. Yeah, all right. Dreams came differently now. The corridor with the door at the end was still there, still the same dream, the one he'd been having since September. The one he understood was Voldemort using their connection to guide him toward the Department of Mysteries. He knew that now, or was increasingly certain of it, and the knowledge changed the texture of the dream. He walked the corridor, and he didn't run toward the door with the urgency the dream was designed to create. He walked it, and he noticed things. The light, the distance. The way the door seemed to promise something it couldn't deliver. He told Dumbledore on a Wednesday night in the headmaster's office. He said he's using our connection deliberately. The dreams are, I think they're designed to make me need to reach the door, to make me feel like there's something important there that I have to get to. Dumbledore set down the small instrument he'd been turning in his hands. You've come to this conclusion by thinking about how she worked, Harry said. The White Witch. She created the need to reach her. She made the terms of the conflict feel like they were set by the destination, the stone table, her castle. As though arriving at her location on her terms was somehow the thing that needed to happen. He paused. Voldemort is doing something similar. He wants me at that door on his terms, which means whatever is behind it is either less important than it's been made to feel, or important in a way that's very different from how it's been presented. Dumbledore was very still. The veil, Harry said, and the prophecy, that's what's in the Department of Mysteries, isn't it? The orb with the full prophecy. Dumbledore looked at him. I don't need the orb, Harry said. You've already told me the relevant part. He wants me to retrieve it because he thinks it matters to me, because he's operating on the assumption that I'm still the boy who's desperate to understand why this is happening to him. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I know why, and I don't need a prophecy to confirm it, so if he's drawing me there, he'll come to you, Dumbledore said quietly, if you don't go to him. Or he'll send people to get the orb himself, Harry said, which is still him moving rather than me, and him moving is better than me moving on his terms. Dumbledore sat back. He looked at Harry with an expression that had moved past adjustment into something quieter and more permanent, the expression of someone who has revised a deeply held understanding and found the revision is correct and is not entirely comfortable with it. "I've been preparing you for a confrontation," Dumbledore said slowly, "for years. I have been building you toward a moment. And you, I know," Harry said. "I'm not angry about it, I understand why." He paused. "But I'm not going to the Department of Mysteries, and I'm not going to be at that door on his terms, and I need you to trust that decision." A long silence. "I do," Dumbledore said. "I think that may be the first time I've said that to you without a modification following it." He paused. "I trust that decision." Harry nodded. "Tell me about the Horcruxes," he said. "Everything, I want all of it." The Horcrux conversation lasted 4 hours and broke Harry's brain in the particular way that information breaks it when the information is both terrible and clarifying, when knowing something awful is still better than not knowing it, because you can work with terrible in a way you can't work with unknown. He sat with it over the following days and turned it in his mind and let the shape of what had to be done settle into its actual form, which was long, hard, dangerous, and finite. It had an end. It required specific things to be done in a specific order. The specificity was something he could work with. He talked to Ron and Hermione about it in the common room on a Saturday night, the three of them by the fire after everyone else had gone to bed. He told them everything. He watched Ron's face go through something, and Hermione's face go through a different something, and he waited for them both to arrive at where they needed to arrive. Ron got there first, which was exactly like him. "Right," he said, "so we find the things and destroy the things." He said it with the tone of someone assigning a homework task. "How many?" "7, Harry said. "One of which is," he paused, "one of which is me." Silence. "Explain that," Hermione said in a very careful voice. He explained it. He explained what Dumbledore believed, and why, and what it meant. He explained it straight through without softening it because there was no version of this that was better for being delivered gently. When he finished, Hermione was looking at the fire with the expression of someone who has encountered a mathematical problem that has no clean solution and is refusing to accept that there's no clean solution. Ron was looking at Harry. "That's not how it ends," Ron said. "I don't know how it ends," Harry said. "Dumbledore doesn't either exactly, but there's," he thought about Aslan, about the things the lion had communicated without words on that night at the stone hall's edge, about the quality of what its time had actually meant, not it's over but something more like it's ready. "There's a deeper magic in this too," Harry said. "There's something older than his power that he doesn't understand. I don't fully understand it either, but I think it involves the same principle, a person making a specific choice." Ron was still looking at him. "You're not afraid," he said. "No," Harry said. "Should you be?" Harry thought about it honestly. "Probably a normal person should be," he said. "But I've been dead once already, kind of in a prophecy sense, and I'm sitting here. And I've watched something like this before in Narnia, the deeper magic that existed before the stone table, before all of it. And what I learned was that the things of real power don't work the way the person abusing them thinks they work." He paused. "He made me a Horcrux by accident. He gave me something of himself without meaning to. That's not his power completing itself. That's his power making an error." He looked at them both. "I'll take the error." Hermione made a sound, half breath, half laugh, half something else. She reached over and gripped his arm briefly, her version of what Ron had done on the first night with the shoulder hit. He recognized it for what it was. "Okay," she said, "then we find the things, we destroy the things, and we figure out the rest." "Yes," Harry said. "In what order?" Ron said. "We start with what we know," Harry said. "Dumbledore and I work on the larger intelligence. You two handle the research, Hermione. You're going to be the most important person in this for a while, because the information about Horcruxes is—" "I'll find it," Hermione said, with a certainty that was absolute and calm and one of the most reassuring things Harry had ever heard. "I know you will," he said. On the last day of November, Harry walked the grounds alone, not for a reason. For the same reason he'd walked the lake edge the night he came back, because he was someone who needed to feel his feet on the ground of the places that mattered. He walked the whole perimeter of the grounds, in the cold, with his hands in his pockets and his breath making small clouds in the air. He walked past the greenhouses and the Quidditch pitch and the edge of the forest and all the way around to the lake. He stood where he'd stood 4 weeks ago. The water was the same still, cold, the giant squid somewhere below, the castle's lights reflected and broken. He thought about Narnia. He thought about Brashen at the map board, about Orin carrying children on his back in the Ridge camp, about Fenwick's 3-beat howl and what it meant, about Gret and her crossed arms and her mountains of structural confidence, about Cain and Hesta side by side at a frozen streambed, finding their shared language, about the stone hall in the dawn after the frozen river battle, with Brashen standing silent beside him looking at the retreating tracks, about Myra. He thought about her for a long time, the sharp-tongued precision of her, the 12 things she hadn't thought of yet that she'd give him when he needed them. The way she'd looked at him at his coronation, full attention, no self-protection. The way she'd said "I know, Harry" in the early dawn of the last morning, when he'd been unable to say the thing he meant, and she had said it for him, and that had been both everything and sufficient. He stood at the lake edge, and he said her name into the dark. Myra, the sound of it in the cold Scottish air. He felt foolish and didn't care. The wind moved off the lake. It moved differently from the way wind moved off the lake. He knew the difference. He'd spent 3 years in a place where the wind sometimes carried intention rather than just weather, where Aslan's presence registered in the air before it registered anywhere else. He knew the difference between weather and something else. He stood very still. The wind moved around him with a quality that was warm at its center despite the cold of the night, warm in the way the lion's breath had been warm, that small specific warmth that went past the skin and arrived somewhere else. And in it, not a voice, not words, not anything that could be recorded or quoted, but a quality, a presence like recognition, like the warmth of someone in the next room who knows you're there. He stood in it for as long as it lasted. When it passed, the lake was just the lake again, and the cold was just the cold, and the lights of the castle were just light. But he understood something he hadn't understood in quite this form before, that the things you build don't end when you leave them. They go on, they carry forward. The specific choices you made, the specific person making them, those remain in the world, in the places they were made, in the people who were changed by them, not in some vague legacy sense. Actually, concretely, the runner network still running, the stone hall still standing. The spring still coming slowly in a frozen land that no longer believed it was permanent. And here, the DA, Neville's shield charm, Ron knowing what he was, Hermione already finding things in the library that would matter enormously. Dumbledore looking at Harry across an office and saying "I trust that decision" without a modification following it. The specific work of a specific person, carried forward. He was not a prophecy. He was not the chosen one in the sense of someone fate had selected and stripped of agency. He was Harry, who had fallen through a cabinet into a frozen world, who had looked at something that everyone agreed was permanent and said that's not inevitable, who had spent 3 years learning what he was actually made of so that he could come back and do what he'd always been going to do. Choose. He turned away from the lake. He walked back toward the light of the castle. He walked like someone who knows exactly where they are going and has already decided to arrive. The wind moved once more at his back, warm at its center, brief, deliberate, and then was still. He crossed the grounds. He pushed open the castle door. The warmth and sound of it received him. Voices somewhere above, the smell of stone and old wood and dinner still lingering in the air, a portrait somewhere arguing with another portrait about something that portraits argue about. He stood in the entrance hall for a moment. Then he went upstairs, back to his people, back to the work, carrying everything he'd been given and everything he'd built, and the name of a lion in a frozen world, and the memory of a hand raised in farewell by a fawn who had given him the 12 things he hadn't thought of yet, and kept nothing for herself. He carried it all the way back. He always would.